Doug,
Hey, Jesus, I just want to jump in there. We're going to
Sure.
start the recording now
Okay.
for the meeting.
all right. Okay. So I'll start off with Doug Ito, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Doug Ito. I'm a managing principal and owner at SMR Architects, and I'm on the board of the Washington Trust, or
Okay.
was formerly on the board of the Washington Trust, and now on this board.
All right. Michael Sullivan.
Hello, I'm Michael Sullivan. I'm a historian in Tacoma. I'm on the board of the Washington Trust and chairman of the board of History Link.
Michael Hauser.
Good morning, everyone. Michael Hauser, I'm the state architectural historian and staff to the advisory council. Welcome, great to see such a big crowd.
Lynn.
Hi, I'm Lynn Mandyke. I'm from Spokane, and I'm with the Spokane Preservation Advocates, and I've been involved in the area in Spokane historic preservation for almost 30 years.
Thank you. Jerry.
I'm Jerry Henniford. I live in Sunnyside, Washington, in the Yakima Valley, where the harvest is in full swing. I'm chair of the Heritage Barn Initiative.
Thank you. Jacqueline.
Good morning and greetings from Nestville in Washington. I'm Jacqueline Cook. I work for the Colville Confederated Tribes in the History Archaeology program.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Kramer. I live in Des Moines, and I'm an archaeologist with a consulting firm in Seattle, Willamette Cultural Resources Associates.
Thank you. And then we have Nicholas.
Morning, everyone. I'm Nicholas Van. I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer at the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation.
Okay, and Holly Barth.
Hi, I'm Holly Borth. I do compliance review at DAP. For the built environment, I'm just here to help support monitoring the Q&A as everyone asks questions, and I hope to respond to everyone as soon as possible. And thank you for working with us. This is a new system, so we thank you all for your patience on that.
And Becca.
Hi, I'm the administrative assistant for the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. I will be monitoring the chat to help go create a list of who would like to speak.
Okay. I'll leave the best for last, and the leader of the group who's constantly challenging us, Allison.
Hi, hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Allison Brooks. I am your State Historic Preservation Officer and the Executive Director of the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here that I might have missed? None? Okay, I'm Jesus Sanchez, and I'm the chair of the board, and a member of this committee, and I have served on many different committees throughout the state and throughout the region, and work at community health systems here with Seymour Community Health as senior vice president. So welcome, everyone. Look forward to hearing from everyone the thoughts and ideas, and as well as from the communities with respect to their concerns or any issues or any supportive thoughts that you would like to share with respect to any of the nominations that we have here today. I'm going to turn it over at this point to Michael to give us a brief update. Michael, will you be doing the first update? Or will that be Allison?
I'm going to let Allison take it over, actually.
Yeah, that's generally me giving you an update on what's happening at the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So we put forward 5 operating decision packages this year. They were due. Decision packages, for those that don't know, are budget requests that are needed for the agency. The first one is to put our GIS platform on permanent general fund state funding, because the funding for Wizard, our GIS platform, has been based on competitive grants, where we could get money from. DNR has given us funding, And with these energy projects, it's no longer okay for us to keep piecing together funding to keep our GIS platform going. So we have asked for funding through the general fund state process to have solid footing for Wizard, our GIS platform. The other interesting project we asked for funding for was for unreinforced masonry buildings. So it turned out that DAP, our agency, has the greatest amount of information on unreinforced masonry buildings in the state. And we were requested by the Department of the Military and the Emergency Management Division to work with them on a multi-agency task force on how to approach the issue of unreinforced masonry buildings that are open to damage or collapse during an earthquake. And so we were asked to put in a budget request to develop a GIS portal for emergency managers to use to find these locations of unreinforced masonry buildings, and to develop a system at DAP where emergency managers can put in more information on unreinforced masonry buildings. Once we build that inventory of unreinforced masonry buildings, or URMs, I'll call them, around the state, then the state will start looking at how do we get these places seismically retrofit to prevent, for public safety purposes. So we are very involved in the unreinforced masonry study. We asked for an additional archaeologist and an additional architect to the workload. And as I've discussed before, we asked for an additional person to help us with our cemetery inventory. So with that, let me say that one of the difficult issues we're facing in the agency right now is balancing renewable energy projects with tribal interests. The governor met with the West Side tribes and East Side tribes just within the past week. He met with the West Side tribes last Thursday, and just Tuesday, I was there, we met with the Yakama Nation and others to talk about the impacts of renewable energy projects on cultural and sacred places, as well as natural resources. So that, and with that, let me add, we are making an offer to someone today to become our tribal liaison specifically for energy projects. So interestingly, we don't have a full tribal liaison, but we were given by the legislature the funding for a tribal liaison specifically for energy projects and to work with developers and tribes on these projects. The difficulty we face is many of these developers are coming in and pre-buying, pre-leasing land, so there isn't alternatives, and that's making everything difficult. One other thing that tribes noted that I agree with is green energy has become the new gold rush. And we're just expecting incredible amounts of renewable energy and transmission corridor projects coming our way soon. So we may need even more staff here. Actually, one of the one of the consultants for the developers had said, your staff needs to be tripled to handle all of this. And sometimes I wonder. So it's going to be the next few years with renewable energy projects, and the tensions are going to be pretty busy. Finally, we are also doing our cemetery study. That has started. We sent out a survey to all the tribes and an offer to meet. The Yakama have already met with us. We met with the Samish tribe. We haven't heard from anybody else. Jackie, I'm hoping that you will want to meet with us and talk about this. Again, the cemetery study is to look at operating cemeteries, particularly with the issue that cremated human remains are not protected, and how do we protect them? And also we're looking at the issue of access when historic cemeteries are surrounded by private property. What are, if any, the access rights of the descendant families of those cemeteries? So there's little pieces to this. And the legislature that tasked us with doing this is hoping to write legislation in December and put it forward in the beginning of session. So before we go to Wallingford, because we have people here today, I would just like to remind people the National Register of Historic Places is a federal designation. The National Register was developed in 1966. It was meant to be both a planning tool for the federal government. In other words, if the federal government was planning a highway through a historic neighborhood or through archaeological sites, they would know that something nationally significant was there, and they would have to look for alternatives and consider mitigation. So it was considered a federal planning tool, but it's also considered an honorary designation. The state and federal government and local governments have no authority over designations on the National Register. I understand people are concerned that National Register listing can lead to local designation, but actually in this state, they are completely separate ordinances and there's no tie. I would also like to point out that in terms of owner consent, and if anybody's curious, nominations for inclusion in the National Register, if you're interested in the federal law itself, it is 54 U.S. Code 302-104 if you want to look it up, or you can read the National Historic Preservation Act. So just a reminder, as I was saying before, I want to remind the committee or the advisory council today that we are subject to federal rules when it comes to the National Register of Historic Places. And that's just what I wanted to talk about with the National Register. That's what's happening at DAP. We are busier than ever. Wish me luck today with the job offer. We also have another archaeologist who's doing permitting, James McRae. And interesting enough, just one other quick note, it looks like our new staff isn't necessarily going to be living in Olympia anymore. State government really has reached a point where the West Side is expensive, and we're seeing a lot of state employees who now live in other parts of the state. And it's a different world. There's a lot of employees now that are basically telecommuting full time. So I'm open to hearing any questions. Oh, one more quick thing. I forgot. I am so sorry. In the governor's budget, we also asked again for funding for courthouses, barns, theaters, cemeteries, and I'm leaving let's see, courthouses, barns, theaters, cemeteries. And what is the fifth one? Am I leaving one out, Nick? I think I'm leaving one out. Courthouses, barns, theaters, cemeteries, maybe not. And then, pardon?
Oh, no, you covered, that was all of them.
Yeah, so, and then of course, I should also add, we also requested additional funding for the Washington Street Main Street program. They had $750,000 last biennium to do some more work with our state's main streets. And we requested that money be put forward again for the next biennium. So I will say this is the largest budget request I've ever put forward. I actually I saw the chief of staff for the governor and I apologize. I'm like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. And she looks at me, she goes, how much? I said, oh, it's about 2 million. And she goes, it's a 2 million for us is huge, but it's a $47 billion budget. So anyway, we'll see what happens, and we're hopeful. And welcome, Becca. So we're happy to have Becca in our agency. I have to admit, I actually called one of her high school friends to get her reference. Shows you what a small town Olympia is, and he gave her a great reference. So good thing. Anyway, thanks everybody.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Allison. Are there any questions for Allison? Okay, so next we'll move on to a report from the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, and who will be doing,
Thanks, guys. My name is Hui Pham. I'm Preservation Program Director with the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, the statewide nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of places that matter in our state. So thanks for DAP and the ACHP for having me today to share some updates as we partner with them on a lot of our work. So the first is that the statewide Historic Preservation and Main Street Conference, Revitalize Washington, is starting next week. We're excited to return in person in Wenatchee after 2 years of virtual or postponed conference. We're expecting over 250 registrants to join us, and walk-up registration is still available if you'd like to come in or if you're already in the area. On Friday of the conference, we'll also have our members meeting where we'll vote in a new board slate that'll join our ranks on January 1st. The Savinsky grant, which is a $2,000 historic preservation grant housed out of the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, deadline is this Sunday at midnight. And I'll post the link in the chat if you're working with an organization or a project that could use some microfunding to get a project started or to even finish up a project related to a place that matters in your local community. On the federal level, our executive director, Chris Moore, had a site visit at the old City Hall project in Tacoma with Representative Kilmer in having conversations about enhancing the federal historic tax credit program. So that is a program that we continue to advocate for at the federal level every year because it allows for amazing projects like Old City Hall in Tacoma to actualize. We're also making great progress on the 21-23 biennium of DAP grant program projects that Allison mentioned for refunding for the 23-25 biennium. So that includes 71 projects between barns, cemeteries, county courthouses, theaters, and then the one-time National Park Service grant program, Third Places, which are local community gathering places. So we're excited to be working on those 75 physical brick and mortar projects getting started. A few of them have finished, and we're looking forward to putting out announcements and celebrations on those finished projects throughout this year through next summer. And then lastly, the Maritime Washington National Heritage Area Management Plan was submitted to the National Park Service in May, and it's looking to be approved by the Department of Interior any day now. So thanks for having me for the update from the Washington Trust. I'll provide some links in the chat, but enjoy your meeting today, guys.
Thank you. Is there any questions for we on the Washington Trust? Looks like you answered all of the questions. Thank you very much for that presentation. Okay, next we have discussion of interest and concerns by the public of items that are not on the agenda. Are there any issues or thoughts or concerns that are not on the agenda that someone from the public wishes to comment on or share concerns? Okay, if not, we'll move.
Jesus, can I just say something really quickly? For those who have signed up to speak on Wallingford, we will need you to state whether you are a property owner or not a property owner and the interested public. Again, because of federal designation, we need to know whether you actually are a property owner or are speaking to us as the interested public. So just thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Allison. So now we'll move on to the review of the proposed nominations to the Washington Heritage Register and the National Register of Historic Places. I'd like to turn that over to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Jesus. And thanks for your comments, Allison. You took a lot of my comments that I was going to say, so great job. Just a couple other additional things. If you have a question, just put those in the Q&A. We've got somebody actually monitoring the Q&A, and that would be Holly, who is our compliance officer here at DAP. And then Becca, for those of you that want to speak, is monitoring the chat. So if you want to talk, what our plan is to do is to create a sort of a running total of who wants to speak. We're going to try and prioritize those that are property owners. So if you can let us know that would be great. And then we'll just unmute you and probably make you a presenter so we can see your face if you're interested in showing us your smiling face. Let's see. With that, let's share my screen.
The first item that I see here is a Sheridan Market.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me share my screen and we'll see if we can get to it here. How is that looking?
Good.
Can you see the presentation mode or just the full screen mode?
The whole screen.
Yeah.
Whole screen. Great. Great. Okay.
Well, no, it's not in presentation mode because we can see your,
Yeah.
we can see all the sidebars and taskbars and stuff.
Oh, it's not in presentation mode.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, so let me try this again then. Thank you, Stephanie. How's that?
Good.
Good.
All right. Well, our first property is just being considered for the state register, and this is the Sheraton Market over in Lake Forest Park. And it's historically significant for its direct connection to the growth and community of Lake Forest Park. It was completed in 1953. The building originally served as the neighborhood local grocery store and continued to operate as such for 30 plus years. As a neighborhood family-owned grocery store, it was integral to the social development and of the community and helped support the growth of not only Lake Forest Park, but other communities in King County up to the north. The building today serves as this rare example, if you will, of its type, a mid-century neighborhood commercial market. It was designed and constructed actually by its owner, Edward Jehoda, who was a longtime grocer who had this vision of owning and operating his own store. Now, the town of Lake Forest Park, for those of you who don't know, is located along the north tip of Lake Washington. It was one of King County's actual first planned communities, and it was developed by realtor and late mayor, Seattle Mayor Ole Hansen, who he and his partner incorporated a development company, the North Seattle Improvement Company, to develop it into a residential park, built especially for people with cars, who laid out according to the contours of the land. Various larger half-acre lots dotted the development, and by the 1920s, about 100 new homes were in the development. However, as the community grew, larger lots began to be subdivided. By the 1950s, this idyllic sort of lifestyle changed, and there's a big boom. And it was under these sort of conditions that Ed Joda saw the potential for this to develop this corner grocery store. He was successful in his choice of a lot. He purchased the property in 1947, which had easy vehicular access and a high visibility. As a multi-year effort, the store opened in the fall of 1953, and business was good. Actually, the following year, Jehoda did an addition to the building just a year after. Now, Edward James Jehoda, he was well suited for the grocery business. At the time of the opening of his market, he had 20 plus years experience in the grocery business. And apparently, as a grocery owner, it was kind of a dangerous task back in the day, probably still is. Over the course of his career, there's numerous articles in the newspaper about Joda's run-ins with various robbers. Many incidents were highlighted, and there's great stories in the nomination. He was actually shot in the leg and spent some time in the hospital. After 50 years of being in the grocery business, by then in his early 1970s, in his early 70s, rather, Joda saw the writing on the wall and the demise really of the neighborhood grocery store. He had by that time converted into more of a convenience store operation, and he decided to lease the building and the store to new proprietors in 1976. Today, the Sheraton Market really serves as an example of the small town neighborhood that once time, dotted neighbors across America, really. It harkens back to a time of those friendly conversations with the store owner, who knew your name, conversations with your neighbors about news of the day, and of course, shopping in your best Sunday outfit. The current owners purchased the property from the Jehoda family members in 2017. They've converted the space into a coffee shop and entertainment venue today, and have been slowly rehabilitating the space. The nomination was written by the owner, Paula Good. This would be the first post-World War II grocery store actually that's independently listed on the register in the state. And I'd like to recommend listing to the Washington Heritage Register.
Any questions?
I think Paula might be on the call. Becca, is Paula there?
Sorry, I'm looking for Paula.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing a Paula in the attendees.
Okay, so maybe Paula isn't here. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this nomination? You can actually just hit the raise your hand button. We'll be fine.
Okay, I don't see anyone at this point in terms of any hand raising at this point. So I'd like to move this as a motion. Is there anyone that like to, our committee would like to make that motion? If not, I'll make the motion that the Shawnee Mark and Lake Forest Park be added to the Washington State Heritage Register. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And who seconded?
That's Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Call for the question. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael, for that presentation. Very interesting. I'm gonna have to drive by and see that place here in Lake Forest Park.
Yeah, I haven't quite made it to the site myself yet either.
Yeah. Okay. So the next item on the National Register is the Granville and Henrietta Holler House, I understand. Cool, Bill. You walk us through that?
Yeah. This is being considered for the National Register, and it's in Coupeville, and it's historically significant under the federal National Register criteria, for its direct connection to the early settlement of Washington State, and particularly for the community of Coupeville over on Whidbey Island. Established at the nominated site in the late 1850s, when Washington was still a territory, components of the nominated house are actually among the earliest known standing structures in the state. They harken back to this initial efforts to establish permanent Euro-American settlements in the Pacific Northwest. The nomination does a very good job sort of establishing this context about what was kind of going on in the state in the early 1950s. Now, Granville and Henrietta Haller, they bought the property actually in 1866, and they built an addition to the existing building, and they also ran a mercantile store, a wharf, and a warehouse on the site. You can kind of see some of the pictures down below here. Their portion of the house is the front portion of the house, the two-story portion of the house. As such, the nomination is actually being nominated under criterion B as well for its direct connection to Colonel Granville Haller. During the treaty area in the Pacific Northwest, it was Haller who was involved directly in the so-called Pacific Northwest Indian Wars, both on the eastern and western side of the states. He was also a key player in the international boundary disputes between Great Britain in 1859, and was a consequential figure in the Civil War, actually before returning to the Whidbey Island as a civilian entrepreneur in the 1860s. The nomination does a very deep dive into the exploits of Haller during his career as a soldier and later as an entrepreneur. In fact, these rely often on some firsthand account of Haller's through Haller's diaries, another period ephemera, which is pretty unusual for us to have that. The house itself is comprised of a 1859 plank house structure, which is joined to the 1866 balloon frame structure. And it's also being nominated as historically significant at criterion C as a resource that embodies the distinctive characteristics of its type, period, and method of construction. We're looking at here some photographs that were taken in 1936 when it was recorded by the HABS program, which is the Historic American Building Survey of 1936. That was a WPA program to put architects to work during the Great Depression era. And this is one of the properties that they recorded. The two sections of the nominated house bring together two of the state's early building systems. Like I mentioned, that plank framing, which is also called box framing. That's the 1859 portion. And the front portion is 1866, is actually what we call balloon frame construction, or early balloon frame. The Haller house is really notable for this connection, explaining these two technologies and bringing them together. It does some great analysis in the nomination of other like properties. The period of significance begins in 1859, the year that first component of the house is built, and ends in 1879, which is the year that Haller actually sold the property. And he moved over to Seattle and built a pretty grand we call mansion, at least of the day in Seattle. That building has been lost. Note the house is currently listed actually as a contributing resource in the Central Whidbey Island Historic District, which has been listed since 1973. So this is an additional designation on top of that, being in a district, just a property owner that's interested in individual designation. It's certainly one that's worthy of it. The residential and the commercial compact around the nominated site, that whole property changed hands multiple times over the early years, but however, it has remained remarkably pretty intact since its last owner, who lived in the house from 1952 to 2004. So a very long time. After much negotiation, the nonprofit group Historic Whidbey purchased the property in 2018. They are deep, as you can see, in the throngs of a complete rehab of the property, and plan to use the building for a house museum, headquarters for their organization. You can see it's got a new foundation, and new siding and window work. The nomination was prepared by Historic Whidbey Executive Director Lynn Hyde and her team. Lynn is here today. I saw her name pop up. Lynn has been really the driving force behind the acquisition and the rehab of the property. And I want to commend her and the organization on their amazing work to save this building and to get it open for public use and interpretation. So I'd like to recommend the Granville Howler and Henrietta Howler House to the state and the National Register of Historic Places under criterions A, B, and C at the local level of significance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Lynn, would you like to make that motion?
Well, I think that Lynn Hyde might wish to speak first, and then I'll give a report.
Okay.
Does Lynn want to say something?
Lynn, I see you up there. There you are.
Yeah.
Go. I think I'm on. Am I
You're
on?
on. You're on.
Okay.
We hear you.
I just want to thank everybody for all the support they've given to us, all the way back to Michael Sullivan cheerleading for us when we were trying to get our feet under us back in 2013 and 2014. It's a great property. It's got a lot of potential. It's gonna, Michael Hauser, you didn't point out that we're going to have a mercantile store like Colonel Haller did with a Victorian soda fountain in it. So the house should be self-sustaining. And we're really looking forward to it being not just a central interpretive venue for our historic district and Eby's Landing National Historical Reserve, but we're already starting to gear up to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution on Whidbey Island. So I want to thank you all for considering our property, and I'll leave you to it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lynn. Is there anyone else that has been signed up to comment on this particular item, this nomination?
Becca, do you see anybody?
I haven't gotten anything in the chat for this one.
Okay.
Okay. And Lynn, I'm assuming there's nobody else that's here to speak.
Stephanie Toothman just made a comment.
Well, I had the opportunity yesterday to actually visit the site, which was a great day. It was very sunny, and I was really, really excited to see how much work that you have done on the project. It was amazing because I was looking at the photographs that were in the nomination, and just in a year's time, you have done so much work. And I really, really commend you for finding the funding to do that and to basically really getting on to getting it done. So I really have a respect for the restoration work, having done that myself. And I also wanted to commend you on the text, in your historic text in your nomination. I thought it was very well written. I really enjoyed reading it, but I also enjoyed the fact that it was thorough and that it really told the historic facts and story about that property and about Granville and how Washington State came into fruition. So, and his important role in that. So again, I really want to thank you for writing that nomination, and the historic context is very, very good. I also want to commend Lynn Hyde and Historic Whidbey for purchasing and taking on this project. And I really wish you great success, and encourage those who have an opportunity to visit, because it's in a wonderful location on a corner and has a great view of Penn Cove. So if there's no other comments, I'd be happy to move on to the motion for the Washington.
I believe Stephanie Toothman has a comment. She's raised her hand. I'm going to promote her to panelist so that she can talk.
Okay.
Good morning. This is Stephanie
Morning.
Tooth, and I have had the opportunity to work with Historic Whidbey now as a board member, but also to learn so much more about Haller and the house. And I think that my question is why the recommendation is at local significance when his presence in Coopville, his time associated with this property is associated with actions that he was involved in from the pig war, or before he was involved in very important case associated with the Civil War, the Indian Wars, and the fact that he's part of the house is part of a district and a contributing part of the district that has already been determined as nationally significant. I'd also mention that the fact that it was documented by HABs usually indicates a higher level of significance than local.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, Lynn, would you turn it over to you?
Or did Michael want to answer that question, or?
I can answer that question, I guess.
Yeah.
I was just following what the nomination had put forth. There is certainly evidence in the nomination that we could go to a higher status, and I'm totally comfortable with doing a national level of significance. We just need to wordsmith a couple things on the nomination to make that happen.
So as always, when we start changing things like that, that comes to the question of, does that mean the nomination has to be put on hold so that it is rewritten? So you would have to hear it again at the next meeting, unless you went with national significance and just, I don't know, and then hope Michael writes it. I mean, it just puts when we change it, it puts a quirk. The other way to go, which is more respectful to the people that have put forward the nomination, is to move the nomination as is. And then if we want to move it up to national significance, then do an amendment later, so we don't hold it up.
What's the, Michael, well, let me ask the committee, what's the committee's direction in terms of doing that and then doing an amendment, making the nomination today and then doing an amendment at a later time, or holding it over? I think holding it over is probably, in my opinion, not the direction I would suggest.
Let me jump in before anybody else answers. I don't think that there's that much that needs to be changed. It's a couple of sentences here and there, so it's not going to be a big stretch to do that. And we've certainly done that in the past, where we've just tweaked a few sentences here and there to make it happen.
So Michael, are you suggesting that the council go ahead and nominate it at the national level of significance, and then you will edit the nomination and move it up to national level of significance? And is the author of the nomination comfortable and okay with doing that?
I can't answer for the applicant, but I'm comfortable with doing that. And we often, tweak nominations around a little bit after the advisory council based on comments that the advisory council has provided, whether they're technical or just expand this period of significance or something like that before it goes off to the federals review board.
Is the applicant here?
Lynn, do you want to chime in? on
Oh,
that?
Lynn Hyde says we are comfortable with Michael's suggestion. Oh, you got a green light. Okay. I wanted to make sure we gave the nominator the right
Yeah.
to say yes or no.
I would agree. Okay. Then if you can tweak that, Michael, I think we can move forward with that. And I'll turn it back to Lynn again for the nomination, for the motion.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion for the Washington Heritage Register at this time. I would move that the Colonel, Granville, and Henrietta House in Coopville be added to the Washington Heritage Register.
I'll second.
Okay, call the question. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries with a notation of that Michael will make a further amendments to that nomination.
And now I'll make the National Register nomination.
Yes.
You ready for that? Okay. I would like to recommend that the Colonel, Granville, and Henrietta Holler House in Coopville be forwarded to the keeper of the National Register of Historic Places for listing on the National Register under criteria A, B, and C at the national level of significance.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much, Lynn. Okay, we'll move on to the historic Washington State fish hatcheries at this point. So Michael, I'm turning it over to you to give us a little bit of historical perspective. I think you're on mute still.
How about now?
Yeah, good. I'm not the only one that does that. That's good to hear.
Sorry about that. I had a couple of additional photos that I forgot to show you of the Howler House. Just a couple of interior images. Some old paperwork. There's a shot of Lynn there, and this is before they started their work. And our Lynn Van Dyke, just took these photos yesterday when she was out there.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Lynn, for doing that. And you can see they're doing a lot of work, a lot of great work. Appreciate that. Okay, this is the multiple property documents, which has been in the works for quite a long time. This is part of a 106 mitigation package, basically a compliance package for some work that was being done to another hatchery that was going to be demolished. The nomination itself has actually been through 3 different authors over the years, several drafts, but it's turned out that it's be a great piece of work that's highlighted previously unknown and undocumented history of our state's fish hatcheries. Now, the MPD, that stands for Multiple Property Documents, has divided the context, the history, basically into these 5 separate contexts, which span this time frame from 1889 to 1974. That's the year of the Bolt decision, a court case became formally recognized. Now, the history of the hatchery system, hatcheries, is really complex and involves agency splitting over time, and it got very confusing to me, so I kind of did this quick little diagram for you. It started out as 2 separate agencies, and then went to 1, and then went to 2, and now it's back to 1, finally reuniting together in 1994. So currently it's the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, but it has been separate entities over the years. And most of these hatcheries that are standing today, the structures were actually built under the split agencies sort of piece, either for the Department of Fisheries or the Department of Game. And generally, Department of Fisheries were building hatcheries for salmon, while the Department of Game were building hatcheries for trout. The nomination does this very good historical overview of these 2 agencies, various factors that influence and shape their management over the various hatcheries across the state. Legislation, politics, technology, increases in the study of how fish actually all shape the location and the design of these hatcheries. And one of the differences that caught my eye, which I didn't know about, was apparently trout like to swim in a circle. So they have round pens, and salmon like to swim in a rectangular pen when they're growing up. So those are kind of a quick differences that you can see if you're just driving by a hatchery and didn't know that. The goal of the nomination is really to help mainly in compliance reviews with little and sets up these registration requirements, which outlines this pretty clearly in the nominations. Many of these resources are pretty utilitarian structures with little or no architectural detailing, but it's that collection that's important to talk about and to tell the story about hatcheries themselves developed. And so what the nomination does is set up this kind of hierarchy, first looking at hatcheries as districts, as the collection, as the whole is the first order of business. And then if it's not eligible as a district, then we're looking at them as potentially individual structures within those boundaries. So it might just be the hatchery building itself, or it could be a dam or a fish weir or a fish ladder, things of that nature. Also could be eligible. The nomination was written by a team of consultants at Cardno Inc., who is on the phone today. Alana is here, and it was also written by some staff at Fish and Wildlife. Adam is also on the phone today. And I'd like to recommend listing of the MPD to the state and national register.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Adam
Are there any
Norbaugh.
comments? Do we have any comments from?
Becca, do you have any comments? I know Adam was here and Alana is here as well.
Okay.
I don't have anybody that has asked to speak.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well then I'll turn it over to both Jerry and Michael, who will be making the nomination. Jerry?
Okay, me first.
Any thoughts? Yeah.
All right. I was amazed at the scope of this application. Just so you know, I have a grandson getting his doctorate in fisheries. He's in Australia right now, but he graduated in fisheries from the University of Washington. And I forwarded this link to him because I thought the history and the content was so complete. So I'm sure he will be interested in reading this. And that's my comment. And I'll turn it over to Michael Sullivan.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think on some level, all of us recognize the importance of fish and salmon in our part of the world. I thought the nomination was exhaustively complete, and with a couple of exceptions. One, first of all, let me compliment them, and I certainly think the nomination is soundly enough prepared that it should be nominated, and I will do so with Jerry here in a minute. I don't think the nomination fully addresses the importance of salmon in terms of cultural history with Native people. You know, when Isaac Stevens sat down in 1855 at Medicine Creek to talk about treaties and what's important to the two sides, it was the tribes who emphasized the importance of salmon and fish and seafood in general. And so I felt like the nomination could have done a little bit better. There is a little section on the Bolt decision, and certainly the Bolt decision had a major impact on the way we built fisheries and managed the resource here in Washington. But in terms of backstory on the overall significance of hatcheries and the management and just the relationship with the environment and with seafood and with fish, I think the nomination probably should have done a little bit more on that. You know, I know Lelemis, for example, you know, have their own hatchery and fish management, and even marine science programs, and I know other tribes do that rely on fish. So be nice to see that filled in a little bit, but I don't think we should delay this designation because of it. I just think it needs to be in the record, and it would make this document a much more important reference piece for people in this this area of study. Just a little thing in that there's a little stumble out of the blocks in the first paragraph. There's an inaccuracy there stating that the fish. Anyway, I can't remember, but it's something to the effect that the first commissioner is established 9 years in 1890, 9 years before statehood. And of course, we become a state in 1889. That's corrected and is right in other places in the document, but in the first paragraph, that probably needs to be fixed. Otherwise, congratulations to the preparers of this document. And I had a chance to drive up and look at the Marble Mount fishery. I've been to the fishery at Puyallup, and I was up at the Samish fishery, which is one of the oldest in the state, just a couple of weeks ago. And these really are extraordinary things. It's a great place to take young people just to learn about the resource. But these are unique types of resources, and we really need to recognize them and make sure we protect them. So Jerry, do you want to make the nomination? I think you should.
To the Washington Heritage Register.
I think Jackie would like to comment first.
Oh, okay.
Jackie, I'm going to let you comment, and then I have something to respond to for Michael's comments too. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Michael, for bringing that those points up about the cultural history. I took it is an exhaustive history of fish and wildlife and fisheries. But the first sentence of the nomination made me grit my teeth because I think we are more than the first human communities that settled here in the region of North America. And as you pointed out, the treaties were based on those usual and accustomed fishing and gathering places. So I was really dismayed at the lack of even a paragraph about tribal fisheries and the importance of tribal fisheries. And if you look at every place that a hatchery has been built, it's been built because there was a fishery there and that there was good water. And that's where the salmon went back. That's where the trout went back. So I would like to see at least a paragraph for the tribes and acknowledging their stewardship of this resource. And through no fault of our own, this resource was depleted and you had to build hatcheries. So it kind of set my teeth on edge, but I learned a lot about the departments and the programs, and was very thrilled in 1994 when they stopped calling it fish and wildlife or fish and game, making it giving those animal beings higher status than just game. So that's all I have to say. But thank you for your hard work, and I think it is an important nomination.
So Michael and Jackie, I think those are good points. The question is whether you would want to table the nomination to get that put in, or whether, and I could put this to Michael, whether Michael wants to round out the nomination himself. And well, either way, I think we might have to, it doesn't matter. We would probably have to table it anyway to get that information and that addition in the nomination. Because I don't think what we should do, I'm talking out loud, sorry now. What we probably should not do is put that in, I mean, they're important and significant pieces. We don't want to put them in the nomination without you having the opportunity to read it and revote. So something to think about. So it would either have to go forward as is, or we would table it for additional information.
I would hate
and
to
I would be open to, I'm sorry, Jacqueline, I would be open to Jacqueline for nomination, excuse me, for a motion to perhaps table.
I would hate to see it go forward without at least some acknowledgement of the tribes and the importance of salmon to their livelihood and to their spirituality. So I would have to support a tabling of this nomination. And it's not a lot of words that you have to put in.
No, yeah,
but I think we should review it again. And
that's what I was going to ask. Exactly. Yeah.
I could make that motion. I move.
Michael, I think I'm sorry. Before we make a motion, I'd like to hear more comment from the board. Michael?
Well, I would just like to ask the question, and I'm going to be in agreement with getting that additional text in there. First of all, I think it strengthens the nomination because so many decisions around dams, I know the Mossy, the city of Tacoma dams, were major lawsuits dealing with resource issues. But the one question I would have, by tabling this, do we in any way do we get involved in any management decisions on the part of Fish and Wildlife? They aren't getting the nomination in place so that the resources, is preserved, or I think what you get what I'm getting at. By delaying this, are we delaying any kind of a mechanism that would help in the preservation of any of the resources?
Michael, yeah, thank you, Michael. I'll chime in there. There's a note from Adam Rohrbaugh, who is the cultural resource specialist with Fish and Wildlife, and he's comfortable with tabling it. So I think that should be fine. It does affect this individual nomination that we're looking at, but you could move forward and approve that pending the MPD. What I want to say, though, is regarding the Bolt decision package. Some of that can be blamed on me because the early draft of the nomination, that kind of text was actually in the nomination. However, I took it out mainly because we're talking about the period of significance ending in 1974 and being the Bolt decision happening after that. And so we really see that context as an additional MPD that talks about the later history of fisheries and tribe and Fish and Wildlife and how that sort of decision affected the agency. So this is the early history, and then we'll do another one for the later history. Same can be said if you look at some bridges and things like that. They were different eras of bridges have been nominated through MPDs over time as well. So that's the reason why the Bolt decision language was taken out.
Okay. Is there any other comment? If not, I'll entertain a motion to table. None? Okay. Do we have a motion?
Jerry, do you want to make the motion to table?
Yes, I will.
And I'll second.
Then, okay, I move that we table this nomination so that more information can be added.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Call for the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Thank
you
you
very much for that. And thank you, Jacqueline, for your thoughts and comments. I think it's very critical and important. And so this is a good opportunity to really make it even. I agree with Michael. It actually strengthens the nomination, so it gives it greater significance. So let's move on now to the next one, the Skagit Salmon Hatchery, and that's also Michael. You want to walk us through that one?
There we go. This is the Skagit Salmon Hatchery. We talked about hatcheries that have this sort of utilitarian design, but this is one of the resources that actually doesn't really fit that mold. This is up in Marble Mount. This is an individual nomination that would go with the multiple property documents. Having an individual nomination is a National Park Service requirement for the MPD to sort of test the registration requirements of that multiple property document. So the Skagit hatchery is historically significant at the local level under criterion A for its direct association with the growth and the development of Washington hatcheries in the post-World War II era. Planned as early as 1945, the initial goal was to build 40 rearing ponds that could produce 6 million fingerlings a year for the waters of the Skagit River and its tributaries. After a variety of funding packages, including funding from Seattle City Light as mitigation for their construction of some dams on the Skagit, site was finally broken on this site in 1946. However, delays resulted as a following of a mudslide and took out the initial construction efforts. It was finally completed, we think, around 1948. At least that's when the grand opening was, and it was the first state-run hatchery on the Skagit River. The hatchery itself is also historically significant at Criterion C as a resource that embodies these distinctive characteristics of its type and its period of construction, and was one of the first hatcheries built after World War II, and broke this long-standing tradition actually of having hatcheries built out of wood. This one is built out of concrete. There's a little bit of debate as to who the actual architect is of the building. The plans note that it was done by William Bain and Associates, which included Walter McKinley and Hiram Bennett. You see a sign here on the building that actually states that Bennett was the architect, but he didn't actually have a license at the time to practice architecture in Washington. So legally, he's not really the official architect. It's his firm that he worked for. It's Bain. Bennett himself went on to have a pretty notable career, and the nomination spells this out in the history. He went on and moved down to Arizona and California and did some additional work there. Regardless of the team that pulled together the nomination, it's certainly a unique structure, combined elements of the streamlined modern style under this French mansard style roof. There's two hatcheries that look the same, built off this initial design. There's this one that's being nominated, and the Dungeness hatchery up in Clallam County is a twin to this building. The construction of the hatchery itself was lauded as a turning point in the state's management of salmon hatcheries. Sockeye salmon were provided as part of the international cooperation under the International Pacific Salmon Fisheries Commission. And they had originated from Bowron Lake up in the Fraser River in Canada. Is how those fingerlings were brought in. By February of 1948, the hatchery itself had 3,300,000 fry in its trough, making it the second largest salmon hatchery enterprise in the state at the time. The salmon hatchery's period of significance begins and ends in 1948, the year that the hatchery was dedicated. The nomination meets the registration requirements as set up by the MPD. Today, the hatchery still serves its purpose, its original function. It operates year-round. Alterations have been made to the building and some of the infrastructure to accommodate changing needs and practices relating to fish science. The nomination itself was written by Marcel Sadlier and Alana Vidmar, of Cardno, who are both on the line today. If listed, this is actually only the third hatchery building statewide to be recognized. The first one from the Department of Fisheries. The others listed are the National Hatchery up in Leavenworth was listed in 1998, and there was a state game hatchery listed in Puyallup in 2013. Some of you might remember that. And interesting enough, we actually have one of the early hatcheries from 1918 that's listed on our barn register, which just requires that it be something in ag use, right? So the developments and the raising of fish. I would like to recommend listing of the Skagit hatchery to the National Register under criterion A and C as part of that multiple property document at the local level of significance due to its sort of regional connection there up into the Skagit River. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any comments from either the authors who put it together or public comment from listed or ready to speak? Is anyone here? Becca, do we have anyone?
I don't have anything in the chat. If somebody would like to speak, they can always click the raise your hand option, but I'm not seeing anything at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to Michael and Jacqueline. Jacqueline, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Once again, this is a well-written nomination, excuse me. And once again, I learned a lot about it, about hatcheries and their unique evolution into the preservation of some of our fish. But I have the same complaints as the previous nomination, that there's no mention of tribes at all, that salmon preservation just sprang from Fish and Wildlife in the territorial days. So I have the same concern. This is a standalone document. I think the tribes need to have a mention in this, and their stewardship of the fisheries prior to settlement. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Michael?
Well, I think it'd be easy enough to go ahead. So I mean, this guy is everywhere. I can't believe the number of things, you know, kinds of property types that he's been involved in. So I think the nomination covers that pretty well. But it is remembering that he's one of the partners in NBBJ, you know, one of the big architectural firms in the world today. But the fact that he's doing fish hatcheries and, you know, housing units during the war and stuff all over. So, but anyway, I think it would be nice to, it would make sense to table this along with the MPD for now.
Okay. So would Michael or Jacqueline make that motion?
I was going to say, is that a motion, Michael?
Jackie, do you want to go ahead and do it?
No, go ahead and do it, Michael.
Okay. I would move that the salmon, the Skagit salmon hatchery nomination be tabled.
Okay.
Let me move that it be tabled for the addition of information about cultural and Native American relations to the nomination, to the story.
Thank you. Jacqueline, is there a second?
Second this nomination, this motion.
Okay, moved and seconded. Call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries, and the Skagit salmon hatchery will also be tabled for the same approach and the need to insert the kind of information that's necessary to make this a more complete nomination that encompasses and embraces the native heritage that should be added to this nomination. So thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one is the fruit and produce row. Michael, turn it over to you.
Just that we go through this nomination and then take a quick little 5-minute break for a bathroom break, if possible. Okay, this is fruit row and fruit and produce row, actually, the historic district up in Yakima. And it's historically significant under criterion A as this collection of warehouses that reflect the growth and development of the fruit industry in central Washington. Fruit and produce in the area was, and of course still is, shipped nationwide. For over 75 years, Yakima County has actually been a top producing county in the state of Washington for apples and sweet cherries and pears and lemons. It's been the leading county in hop production. Yakima farmers also produced, grapes and nuts and vegetables. And this is where it all happened. A lot of it was shipped from this area, this dedicated area located in the central city of Yakima. Together, the warehouses, through their scale and their concentration along the railroad, they really illustrate this impact of the fruit and production capacity of the Yakima Valley. They also highlight the importance and the significance of the Northern Pacific Railroad as a means to ship fruit and produce to both national and international markets. The district itself, here it is highlighted on this map, is located adjacent to the city of Yakima's downtown core. It extends along the historic Northern Pacific Railroad. At its peak, the warehouse extended over a mile long, actually, along the rail corridor, and was comprised primarily of agricultural packing and cold storage warehouses. Today, the nomination is just 2 blocks long, the area that's being nominated, and between First Avenue from D Street to Yakima Avenue. Now, Fruit and Produce Row got a start in the early 1890s, following the 1885 arrival of the Northern Pacific Railroad. Later, several periods of growth in the agricultural industry, consumer demands, technological improvements in the storage of fruit all helped shape how this district and existing built fabric came together. As such, the nomination itself is also being listed or nominated under criterion C as its collection of warehouses which serve examples of their type, their period, and their method of construction. They were built from the 1880s through the 1960s. They stand as important examples, both locally and statewide, of several distinctive periods of construction, and demonstrate several method of constructions as well, through the use of stone and brick, concrete block, and even precast concrete. They also demonstrate some advancements in technology and the progression of cooling systems in the building themselves and how that relates to cold storage. The nomination does a very good overview of the Yakima Valley and the fruit industry that helped drive the economy, which by 1959, Yakima itself was producing 529 million pounds of apples and 73 million pounds of peaches that were being shipped out. At first, these buildings used this passive heating and ice system to help keep the fruits cool, but it was eventually replaced by refrigeration systems, and some of the buildings in the nominated area still have these original systems in place. Fruit and Produce Row continued to be the industrial hub of Yakima well into the 1950s and 60s. In fact, several warehouses were constructed even in the late 1960s, reflecting this change in technology and still the demand for fresh produce. One of these changes, which I thought was interesting, is just this phasing out of wooden apple boxes. Everybody kind of knows the old wooden apple boxes in favor of cardboard boxes. This happened in the 1950s. The nomination breaks the warehouses up into 2 categories, both a common warehouse and a cold storage warehouse. There are 23 contributing buildings in the historic district area. 3 of those are considered non-contributing and 2 are vacant lots. The period of significance begins in 1898 with the construction of the first extant warehouses in the district, and ends in 1969. That's the year when the first precast concrete warehouse was built. Again, changing that technology, so theoretically another nomination could come through later talking about that more recent history. The nomination is developed as part of a grant through our certified local government program here at the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. Katie Pratt and Spencer Howard with Northwest Vernacular were the authors of the nomination. Katie is on the line today. As a proponent of the nomination, Yakima has met our additional public requirements for notice. They held several public meetings about the pending district. They sent individual notice to all the owners. They developed a webpage highlighting the district and its review process. And I'd like to recommend listing of Fruit Row on to the National Register in a criterion A and C at the statewide level of significance.
Michael?
Hey, Michael, this is Allison. Unfortunately, Michelle Sadler had raised her hand to speak on the fish hatcheries, and somehow we missed it. So I think we just need to step back for a minute. We should have let her talk and give her minute. So Becca, you can promote Michelle to panelist and let Michelle provide her comments. Thank you. Sorry about that, Michael. It was just it was a miss.
Yeah, I apologize. My laptop just went blank for a second, so I totally missed the raised hand. So I apologize, Michelle.
No problem, Holly. I know it's hard to manage these things. I started to break the flow of this particular nomination too, so I'm sorry about that. But I did just want to say that one of the reasons that the previous nomination didn't have the tribal connection in it was because the original nomination was just for the building and looking at it as a sort of architectural standalone. And that scope was expanded out after the nomination was submitted. So it's certainly appropriate for the information to be coming in there. I just wanted to explain why the nomination that you saw come before you didn't actually have more than just digging into the details of the building, which was so far beyond the period of tribal involvement that it really just focused on the period of significance. So it's certainly not to say that it didn't influence in the early days, but the entire hatchery, which is now up for nomination, of course, really needs that information in there. So just wanted to put that in as a point of clarification.
Okay, thank you for that, Michelle. And we'll now go back to the nomination on the fruit and produce row. Is there anyone listed for commenting? Becca?
Yes, I'm going to make Katie Pratt a panelist so that she can speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, can you all hear me? Great.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Katie Pratt with Northwest Vernacular. As Michael Hauser said, Spencer and I prepared the National Register nomination for the Fruit and Produce Row Historic District in Yakima. Just to give you a little background, this district nomination really started with an intensive level survey of this area, which was funded by a CLG grant from that the city of Yakima received. And then after that survey, they followed up their dedication to this really important area by seeking out another CLG grant to then fund the nomination preparation. And we believe that this collection of warehouses really demonstrates the Yakima Valley's capacity for fruit and produce production and its key role as a shipping center for sending those goods to national and international markets. This collection of warehouses is significant locally and statewide. And as Michael mentioned, it showcases several methods of warehouse construction, as well as those changes in cold storage technology. This nomination built upon the intensive level survey by tracing the paths of the three main railroads through central Washington and tracking other warehouse districts to show how Yakima's fruit and produce row retains really the highest concentration of early warehouses in the region and the greatest concentration of fruit warehouses in the state. So I appreciate the opportunity to comment and thank you for your thoughtful review.
Thank you, Katie. Is there anyone else signed up, Becca?
Nope, nobody else.
Okay, I'll turn that over then to both Jacqueline and Jerry to take it from here. So who would like to go first?
Oh, let Jackie go first.
Well, we have had some very well technical and exhaustive nominations in this go around, and this was one of them. I like this nomination, having grown up in the fruit industry and my parents working both in hops down in Yakima, as many tribal people did, and working for J.M. Wade up in the Okanagan Valley. And it was working in the pear season that I decided that maybe I better go to college and do something different. And the fruit industry is deep in my heritage. My mother could pack 100 boxes of apples a day, and my dad ran the packing shed. So I really enjoyed this, and I think these structures are important, and we see them disappearing all the time. And I still live in fruit country, but behind these buildings, and this is just a thing behind these buildings and the industry that was built and the major families that own these orchards and this industry. There's people. And once again, I just want a paragraph about the people who helped build this industry. We don't even see anything about the people that came and helped do this. First, the settlers into the Yakima Valley, and then it was common for tribal people to come to Yakima and work in this industry. And one of the biggest events in Yakima was when the hops were being picked and the fruit season started, was a gathering of the tribes. Essentially, Chief Moses came down from up here to participate in that. And then as we see this 20th century move, we see other people moving in, the Hispanic communities that have built this on their backs. And for anybody who hasn't worked in that end of agriculture, you know that they have to work hard. And so this is why this is so dear to me, but a simple paragraph talking about the people who made this possible. And we honor them by preserving these buildings, but we have to honor them in paper as well, so that other people might be interested when they see something like this and read this and say, well, when did the Hispanic community come in? When did these other people come? A lot of our own people don't understand how important it was for the food, for tribal people to work in the fruit industry, you know. And many of those people went on to have their own orchards as well. So Yakima Nation has their own orchards. So I would, as Michael said about the hatcheries, this would be a stronger nomination if we show a little honor to the people who helped build it. That's all I have, but it's a well-written nomination and it's extensive. Lots of good research went in there. So thank you for that hard work.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Jerry?
Yes, well, I didn't really think that it went that far back into the industry. I thought it just was about the storage, packing, and shipping of the fruit. So I really didn't miss that about the people. There was some information I especially enjoyed about J.M. Perry, who did great things in Yakima. But I'll have to think about what you said. I think the point of it, though, was the storage, packing, and shipping.
Yes.
So I'm okay with going ahead with this one.
Yeah, I think I'll also chime in because I'm from the Yakima Valley. I was raised in Toppenish, born in Texas, but I migrated with my family as migrant workers in the Yakima Valley, and lived at the Goldendale labor camps as a very young child. But I also, as my family did, my mother, I picked along apples as well, Jacqueline, with my mother in the Yakima Valley, picking apples for a living, obviously. And it does bring memories when I take a look at the buildings and I reminisce about the hard work that the families, not just our families, but all the families that came in the late 30s and 40s, early 40s to the Yakima Valley as migrant farm workers to pick the harvest and make it a national and international industry. And it is on the backs of the indigenous community, as well as the Hispanic community, many other communities that came later. My mother picked apples until she was 62 years of age. And we were so happy when she broke her leg, because we now knew that she was not going to pick any apples. We kept telling her, stop picking, we'll take care of you. And she finally did. And so, but she lived to be gracefully to 103 years of age. So she lived on another 60 years. But, you know, I think it's important to recognize what does, what's so important in what makes these industries successful is the labor behind it, the people, the humans behind that effort. And so it is a contributing element that I think is important. Michael?
First of all, I think the nomination's very well written, and it certainly qualifies the properties for designation. But, you know, Jesus, our friend Erasmo Gamboa would kill us if we didn't mention the Bracero program and the introduction of Latino workers, warehouse people working in that area.
Yeah.
And being from Yakima, growing up there as a kid, I can tell you the city of the demographics and the social fabric of Yakima was changed forever after the Second World War. And a lot of the people that moved to Yakima after that time, when I was growing up as a little kid in the late 50s and 60s, were people moving to the city that were Hispanic families that had come through the Bracero program and that were working in the warehouses as opposed to working in the apple orchards. So it would, and actually when you get into the neighborhoods immediately to the north of there, you really get, and to the east of there, you really get a feel for that influence. So I think it would be a better nomination if there was a little more context, social history and context and storytelling around the people that were there. Boy, I remember a story as a little kid of one of the warehouse people getting caught in one of the big buildings that had converted over to refrigeration and cold storage, and him being locked in and finding, you know, that risk of being found. Here's a man who had lived his whole life in the desert of Mexico, and he died of frostbite, you know. So anyway, great human stories around the warehouses.
So
Thank you, Michael.
Let me add something here, just really quickly. So when I was on the National Park Service National Historic Landmarks Committee, I pushed hard for social history, and the Park Service kept pushing me back and saying, well, that's not a part of anything. And I said, no, you know, these places have biographies like humans, and we need to give them a biography. And I was always like, you know, it's just Allison. So with that said, that doesn't mean that we can't put more social history in the nominations that we accept. So Michael, what I'm hearing from the council, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing that just like I wanted to with landmarks, I'm hearing that you want to see social history, even if it's an architectural nomination. And from my perspective, I think that's very fair. And it's been, and Michael Sullivan, you and I have talked about that quite a bit, that the social history just seems to get lost in the federal requirements. So Michael, I'm going to suggest that we talk as an agency that even though we're not writing the nominations and other people are, we really put a emphasis on social history that goes with the architectural history, because in fairness, these things don't live by themselves. And I'm sorry, Lynn, if I jumped over you. You have your hand up.
Not a problem. I just wanted to say in support also that I feel that it's very much a part of the historic context, maybe not the architectural history as much as the historic context of that area and what transpired. We write the history about the community, but we really don't talk about the community itself. So I would agree.
You know, you guys, we're never going to change the obstacle that the current definition of integrity creates in telling stories of people whose stories aren't told. We're never going to be able to overcome that unless we keep pounding these nominations through with these social histories connected to them. Because Allison, as you know, the NPS survey we did of historic places associated with Latino history, both on the east side and the west side, more times than not, rely on the power of place from very modest buildings. It's the story that drives the historic importance. And this is a classic example too. Somebody driving by on a train, this is just a bunch of big geometric boxes. And
No,
I,
if I can, Alice, if I can just share a comment real quick, Michael, I did work with Dr. Erasmo Gamboa on several projects, Latino projects, a few years back at the insistence and demand from Allison that I do that. So she twisted my arm, and so we worked on this. But thanks to Allison, we have a lot of designation of historical significance or designation of significance for Latinos involvement in the communities in the Yakima Valley. But it is important, and I completely agree with you. I think that the social aspect of it is a very vital piece to anything that we do here moving forward. Go ahead, Allison, I'm sorry.
When I see a subheading cultural data, the anthropologist in me wants to know the cultural data, not about a building. The building is fine, but people built those buildings, and people's hard work enabled those buildings to be built. So, you know, I can still remember the smell of the Apple warehouses. That's how much I hung out in them as a child, you know. And so I just can't emphasize enough, you know, that's really important for this nomination. And it would be a fine example for the rest of the state to follow with large Hispanic communities such as Wenatchee, such as Brewster, where it's 90% Hispanic in Brewster. I don't know what Gebhards would do without that community.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yep.
Allison, did you have, I'm sorry, Jacqueline, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll let Doug go, and then I'll.
Okay, Doug.
I would agree with everybody on all those points, and I would note that in the chat that Katie Pratt says she will work with Michael to incorporate the information in the nomination. So I don't think there's an issue.
Okay.
So I was just going to say that the National Conference of State Historic Preservation's officer did just complete a big study on the National Register of Historic Places. We came to a lot of recommendations on the process, including that cultural significance needs to be considered as much or more as architectural significance. And that's why, you know, talking about being a leader, you know, our office is doing a study. We were commissioned to do a study of important ethnographic places in Seattle, places of cultural significance, not architectural. But anyway, it's with all state historic preservation officers are really pushing this idea of cultural significance. Jackie, we met with the National Association of TIPOs. We met with TIPOs. We met with Latino Heritage Associations. We met with the Black Archaeologist Group. We met with a variety of marginalized and diverse communities, as well as the landscapes. And we came up with recommendations. Those recommendations were sent to all the diverse and marginalized groups that we had worked with. They agreed with our recommendations. The problem we're having is the National Park Service is just being very defensive, and I'm not sure they're necessarily going to take our recommendations to change the way the National Register is done and the way the criteria and the integrity considerations are reviewed. I was hoping that they would be more open. Maybe, you know, the reality is we just have to keep pushing. And Michael, I like your idea where Washington State just keeps doing what we're doing, like we did with our Latino Heritage Study, like we're doing with our Chinese Exclusion Study, like we're doing with our Filipino American Study, like we're doing with our huge Black Heritage Study, is we just keep pushing the envelope until, you know, sort of the dam breaks, so to say. And so we've but you're right. Everybody knows the National Register needs improvement and to change. And unfortunately, the Park Service doesn't seem to think the changes are as critical as we all think they are, but doesn't mean we're going to get.
I know the current superintendent of the Park Service on a personal level. I can talk to him.
Oh, Jackie, I think it's great. I mean, I think Chuck Sams, I would think Chuck Sams would be super open The
I think
problem
so
is it
too.
shuts SAMs at all. You know, as all bureaucracies are.
Yeah.
The head changes and the staff doesn't. And that's where the rub is coming in.
Okay.
You can
Sorry.
wear them down.
Yeah.
Do I hear a motion then to table this particular nomination as well?
I so move. Michael, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that maybe we consult with Michael here on this one. I know that Katie Pratt and Spencer Howard at Northwest Vernacular worked on the Latino study over in Yakima. And so they do, I think they could fairly quickly make make additions. So Michael, if we approve this now, could those changes be made before it's sent to the keeper rather than delay this one?
Absolutely. Yeah, changes can always be made. And that's really the point of your guys' review is, hey, let's beef this section up. Let's make these adjustments before it gets sent off to NPS.
What if we did a compromise? Sorry, he's just really quickly where Michael beefs up the nomination, but he sends it out for your review first, because I'm a little worried about beefing up the nomination and not having the council see it.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to suggest is that we do need to review it as a group before it goes further. So I think it might just bear that may have to be tabled still.
Okay.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Good
Michael's
work.
never going to give me anything to read again.
Oh, it's all
Jackie,
good.
I think your points are important, and I think you're pointing out the direction we've been moving. And like I say, the Park Service isn't exactly helping, but that doesn't mean our state can't make better changes. And I appreciate you bringing them up. You know, we have to keep this moving forward.
Allison, can I add something to that, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just absolutely want to reiterate everything Allison just said. And trying to change anything in state government alone is really difficult, but we have a better handle on that. Trying to change something in the federal government is trying to move and rotate the world's largest battleship in a pool of quicksand. And so it's not easy to try to implement that change. And our office has been very, very vocal, and we know that there are a lot of other SHPOs and a lot of our constituents that are extremely vocal as well, and we take all those things to heart. And so when we take those things to heart and we try to prod the Park Service into looking and listening to us to implement the change, just having their ear is a small win, but changing something overnight is not something we're able to do. I mean, this is going to take probably my entire career. I know Allison's been working on it for decades, throughout her entire career. And so it's not an easy task, and just appreciate everyone's patience and understanding, but also just want to iterate that we're relentless in fighting those types of things.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nicholas. I've worked in state government for far too many years and know too well how long it takes to make things changes. But I've always said government ought not to be telling us why we can't do things. It ought to be telling us how we can do things. But that's just always been my philosophy in service and as a public servant is to help, not necessarily just to constantly hinder. But let's move on. So good nominations, great nominations with some improvements that need to be made or additions that need to be made. So I think it's great. And we'll now move on to the Heritage Barn Register at this point. So I'm going to turn over to you, Michael.
Hey, Suze, I think I need a 5-minute break.
Oh,
get a stretch.
Let's take a quick 5-minute break. And we'll return at 11:18.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, well, hold on.
Jerry, you might want to put yourself on mute during the break.
Okay. All right, do we have everyone back?
I think we do. Thank you.
Okay,
Jesus.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. All right, so we'll now move on to the Heritage Barn Register and turn it over to you, Michael.
Thank you. Before I do that, I just want to say I appreciate all of your comments on those nominations and message received. We can work over those nominations very easily, and nominations in the future. We'll take a closer look at this social impact and make sure that's in the nominations.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's go on to move on to barns. And today we're looking at 7 barns. So this is for our Washington Heritage Barn Register. And I just wanted to talk to you about them in a group, actually, and just go over a quick overview of the ones that we're looking at. This is the Harmon Ranch barn. This is up on Decatur Island, circa 1920. Don't know the exact build date. Some resources claim that the barn is more like 1910. The central portion was certainly built first with its log construction, and then the wings were built afterwards. Roy Harmon, who it's named after, purchased the property in 1919. Most folks know it as the Harmon Ranch. You can see it's got log construction on the inside as well for the framing system. One of the few log barns that we have on the register. This is the Lange barn up in Skagit County. This is 1913. It's what we call a Dutch gambrel because it's got those little extra eaves canted eaves at the eave line. Built by Norwegian immigrant Peder Lang, who settled the Skagit Valley in the early 1900s. This barn was reportedly moved on the site sometime in the 1930s. It's 30 by 50, which is pretty typical of these sizes of barns for a gambrel barn. This is the Elliott family farm. This is actually here in Olympia. And this is built in 1949. It's an English gambrel design. It doesn't have that little extra cant out of the eaves. This is unusual in its construction because it's concrete block. We have a few of those that are listed on the register with its upper floors constructed in wood, that loft area. It would be one of our newer barns, at least in terms of the build date listed on site. It's right here off of Cooper Point. Great looking sort of mid-century barn. This is the Pruitt farm out in Yelm, another one in Thurston County. This is around 1915. The owner was actually thinking it was built in 1901, but we can tell by the architecture of the barn that it was built later. Notice it's sort of the craftsman style brackets and the eaves lines, and just the construction method gives it that later built date. And it's a Dutch gambrel again with that little canted eave on the line. This is a new owner, just bought it here a couple months ago. This is an interesting property. This is the Wheeler farm out in Waitsburg, built in 1881. At least the central portion of the 2-story portion was built in 1881. The second floor to this was added around 1890, and then the wings were added later in the 1970s. It was built by reportedly W.C. Wheeler, who was ran the local newspaper in town, the Waitsburg Times, and it's got some great other resources on site, including this schoolhouse. It's 40 feet by 25 feet. The shape of it. This is the Larson farm up in Whatcom County, in Bellingham, outside of Bellingham. This is around 1920 as well. This is a Dutch gambrel with this attached lean-to, at least on one side of the building. It has this truss roof system for the gambrel. As we all know, there's different sizes of systems for the trusses. This was used as a cattle barn back in the day. It's got some interesting outbuildings on the site as well. And this is the last one. I'm excited about this property. This is a circa 1910 barn. It's called a Dutch barn. It's got that massive gable roof. It's 40 by 60, which most of these tend to be. It's sitting on a stone foundation. It's got multiple buildings on site. Actually, another barn. So this one that's painted actually sits behind. You can see it here in this photo, and some great outbuildings. And the owners recently rehabilitated the house and did that back barn, and now are working on the front barn. I wish I had more time to show you some before and after pictures, but a pretty amazing property. That is the group for today. I know there were barn owners that wanted to be on the call. If you folks could maybe just raise your hands, we can.
Yeah, I think we had someone from the Elliott family farm.
The chat. Becca, was there people that are barns that wanted to speak?
Yes, I can promote them to panelists.
Thank you. Hi, Roy.
Hello, I'm the owner of the Whitman County Barn.
We'll let you speak first.
Let me fix my lighting here really quick. That should be a little better.
Yes,
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any specific questions, or do you want me to give you just a quick little history of our time here?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Roy.
We bought this property about, it's coming on 5 years. It's 4.5 years now. And it was a completely rundown, abandoned farmhouse with the abandoned barns. And so we've restored the farmhouse, we've restored the one barn. And our goal is to restore this other barn, but it needs a lot of foundation work because of the rock foundation, and there's some dry rot at the bottom of the walls. And we'd like to get it on the registry so we can apply for grants to help us financially restore that barn. And it's a pretty neat chunk of land. We're trying to save as much of the savable stuff as we can. Yeah, and that's kind of it.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? If not, thank you, Roy. And I think we have Nikki as well. Nikki?
Yeah, I am the owner of the Larson Farm up in Whatcom County. And we bought the property a couple of years ago, and the barn has been neglected for several years. And so we are trying to restore it back to the way it was.
Okay, thank you for that. Becca, is there anyone else?
I believe Dylan Hubbard is on.
Okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so we purchased this property last year and have been looking into the history. We're starting a small farm in Olympia, Washington. And we found out that this barn has a long history with the Elliots, who owned this property originally. I think that they had over 300 acres and had parceled it off. And it's actually why Elliott Ave is named, coming from downtown. They changed it a couple of years ago to 20th Ave. So we also are thinking about working with the city to restore some of that history in Elliott Ave coming from downtown. The barn, we've been putting a ton of work into. It has been basically untouched for the past 30 years. Been replacing a lot of the joists and a lot of the foundation. Been putting a lot of work into that just to keep it stable and upright. I think a few more years of letting it go and it would have been rubble. So yeah, we're looking for, we started to look into grants, to particularly because a lot of the main foundation has been eaten out by either termites or ants. And so we're looking for grant money to just keep it stable.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Anyone have any thoughts or questions of Dylan? Okay, then I'll turn it over to Doug, and who else is supposed to be speaking on this one?
This would be Jerry, actually.
Jerry?
Yes, there isn't anyone else that.
I'm sorry, yes, it was
any
Jerry.
other barn owner? I thought, Becca, did you say there were other barn owners on?
We had a couple people in the chat, but I think I've covered all of them. If I've missed anybody, go ahead and hit that raise your hand button and I'll make you a panelist.
Oh, just didn't want to miss anybody. So I'm just so happy that these barns are also going to be added. I hope it's very satisfying to save these heritage structures, and I hope you'll all agree with me that we should list them on the Heritage Barn Register.
Okay, any questions?
Add that I love this program, and I actually can't remember how long it's been around now, maybe 10 years or something? I don't even know.
Since 2007.
Oh, okay.
And it was a bipartisan effort. So for people that no longer believe that there's a world of bipartisanship, Jerry did it, and Senator Honeyford did a great job of making this developing the barn program as a bipartisan effort. It was great. With now Congressman Dan Newhouse too, and Representative Pat Lance.
Yeah.
Thank you,
We,
Allison.
And Michael, we have helped to restore over 100 barns all over the state, and I'm sure they would not be here anymore if we hadn't helped. So I'm hoping it can continue now that we're retiring.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Jerry, would you like to make the nomination?
Yes, I move
Motion,
that.
excuse me, the motion.
I move that we add these barns to the Heritage Barn Register.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Okay, we have first, we have the motion and a seconded. These are not called a question. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. And thank you for that presentation, Michael. And love these photographs every time they come through. I love to see all these different styles of work that's been done over the years. Good work, thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to Michael again to the Wallingford Meridian Streetcar Historic District presentation.
Yeah, before we leave the barn properties, just to
I'm sorry.
just to let all the barn owners know that now that you're on the barn register, you are eligible to apply for the barn grant program when we have money available. And as Allison mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we'll be asking for another round of funding. So stay tuned on that.
Yes, I believe we asked for $1 million again for the barn program. So if you are a supporter of the barn program, please let your state legislator know that you would like to see the program continue.
Great. Well, let's get on to Wallingford, our last nomination of the day. Thank you for your patience if you are here just for that. How are we doing? Could you see that screen?
Yes.
All right. Okay, this is the Wallingford Meridian Streetcar Historic District. It's up in Seattle. It's being nominated under Criterion A as this intact streetcar suburb, as set forth in the specific registration requirements that are outlined in this MPD, multiple property document that's called the Historic Residential Suburb in the United States, 1830 to 1960. So it's specifically sort of looking at those registration requirements and pulling out one of those elements to make this district eligible. The nomination represents this broad patterns of residential development and growth in Seattle during the early part of the 20th century, which spurred by a population boom in the city. The area largely was developed really in a short 20-year time span, and it formed this integrative sort of cohesive design that you see when you travel around the neighborhood. Although much of Wallingford was platted between the 1880s and the 1890s, the initial remained pretty sparse up until around 1900, 1905. That's when it really began to sort of take off. This is a map just showing different plats of the area where developers were buying old farmsteads basically and subdividing them. When initially developed, the neighborhood was located on affordable land. It was outside the city boundaries of the city center and could be accessed through the use of streetcar lines. And this is a map showing those streetcar lines. And at such conditions, you can see one of the streetcars went right through the neighborhood and others surrounding both sides. Such conditions created this middle-class neighborhood of blue-collar workers who really supported a variety of businesses across the city. And development was anticipated, and so the school district even purchased several larger parcels for the construction of schools, churches, if you will. In 1910, when the U.S. Federal Census was taken, there were over 200 residences in the district. 33% of those at the time were rentals, actually, while 72% were owner-occupied. So, a mixture of properties for sure. Several apartment buildings in the historic district were constructed sort of adjacent to 45th Street in the 1920s between 25 and 29. This effort was to increase the density in the neighborhood. And so these are some of the properties that are reflective of that. There's also churches and schools that were constructed in the neighborhood as well. Just a couple of shots of those. The rise of the automobile is also evident in the neighborhood. There are garages that are in the neighborhood. Most of those are on the front of the lots because they didn't have alleyways. It wasn't platted with alleyways. By the 1930s, really most of the lots in the district have been built out, and it began to be a thriving residential neighborhood. As such, the district is also significant under criterion C as this collection of properties that embody distinctive characteristics of their type, period of construction. And notable, it contains this concentration of different styles of architecture, like colonial revival, like classical revival, like Dutch colonial, Tudor. It's got this great mix in there, but really notable, I think when most folks think of Wallingford, they think of the Craftsman style. And it just has this wide range of interpretations of the Craftsman style, constructed by multiple builders. And the simplicity of these and the artistry is pretty evident by the design and the convenience that was afforded to these families. Lots at the time sold for about $500 to $200 or $2,000. The average price of a house in 1920 was $6,300. That's equivalent to about $78,000 in today's dollars. Now, while only 13 of the buildings are documented in the district as architect designed, 84 builders have been identified in the district using what we think are probably mass-produced plans, such as Judd Yoho's Craftsman Bungalow. Many of these were popularized through his magazine, and in fact, his own house is listed as part of the neighborhood, and this is it down here on the bottom left and featured on the cover of one of his magazines. There were several other architects who resided in the neighborhood, who actually lived in the neighborhood. But again, this builder and having this builder focus and connection to the nomination is a little unusual for us, and I've been kind of pushing that as of late. So it's great to see that. The nomination was developed as part of a project with Historic Wallingford neighborhood. They're a community activist group with the help of some grant money and some fundraising. They hired Katie Pratt and Spencer Howard at Northwest Vernacular to offer the nomination, which was then pulled together by a team of individuals who did a lot of background research. The nomination itself has been in the works for at least 2+ years, probably longer. I know I've reviewed several different drafts myself and commented on those. It's a large district, but it's certainly not the largest in the state. We've got one in Tacoma that the North Slope Historic District that is double this size. There are 642 contributing resources in the district, and notice it breaks it up by primary buildings and secondary buildings. So primary buildings are the basically dwellings, and the secondary would be garages, sheds, things of that nature, mainly garages. So really there's 929 buildings per se, I guess, in the district. There's one that's already listed. That's the school, Good Shepherd, is listed. Federal regulations require DAP to do public notice in the paper, which we did. We also are required to notify the certified local government, the CLG, which is the city of Seattle. Since we have over 50 property owners, our only requirement actually is to do a public notice in the paper, a legal notice in the paper, which your predecessors on the advisory council felt that wasn't enough to do. So we have some additional requirements that I'm going to tell you about in a second, but I want to tell you that it did go to the city of Seattle. They have posted the nomination on their website. They followed their internal protocol process about reviewing National Register nominations. For us on the State Review Board, we adopted this additional historic district review policy clear back in 2005 to try and get people aware of what's going on for the nomination instead of just that legal notice. And so we put together this little matrices about ways that folks can pull together nominations and let people know. As a proponent of the nomination, the historic district, Historic Wallingford rather, has met our additional public engagement requirements. They've held various virtual meetings about the pending district on Zoom. They developed a web page, virtual site on their page that highlights the review process, the nomination. That was actually noticed in the Seattle Times as well. They have a very strong media presence, so they were doing that as well. Let me give you the count. In terms of, we've had a huge response in terms of letters that have come in, and I've been gathering the names on a little Excel spreadsheet and matrices. So far, there's So far, there's 543 names of letters that came in. 29 of those are supporting the nomination and 524 object to the nomination. However, I got a question mark there because by the federal regulations, only property owners are afforded the right to object. And so I have this 30 because one of the things that we don't know of the 30 is this notion of people actually submitting, telling me, one, where they live. A lot of them didn't have addresses on them, and two, a signature was required. And so I don't have those. However, off of the 30 that came in, 10 were supportive letters and 20 were objection letters. Just to note that with approximately 643 lots in the neighborhood, there would need to be 322 formal objection letters. Out of the 30 property owners, let's see, I already told you that. The National Register criteria that is being nominated under, these are the federal requirements, is criterion A and criterion C. That's our charge today, is to look at those two areas of significance. One is criterion A, that's broad patterns of history. And the other one is criterion B, a collection of architecture characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. I would like to recommend listing of Wallingford Meridian Streetcar Historic District in Seattle to the National Register under criterion A and C at the local level of significance. Now I know, Becca, that several people have signed up that would like to speak. And the last that I heard, there's around 15, is that right, Becca? Around
Yes,
15?
we have 15.
So I'm going to leave it up to you, Jesus, as to how you want to handle those 15.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and hear the presenters, but I would like to work with Becca to make sure that we have, so we're able to complete this reasonably within reasonable amount of time. I think a 2-minute presentation would be sufficient. If the board has any other thoughts, I will happily entertain it.
Just Jesus, that we're going to start with property owners and then move to the non-property owners.
Sounds good to me.
And
Okay.
Jesus, when would
Yes.
you want comments from the board versus the comments from the public?
Generally, I like to hear comments from the public and then go back to the board and then have board comment as well. If that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Becca, you will monitor our time here.
Yes,
Oh,
okay. I can. Yeah, I'll monitor the time and let people know when they've got about 30 seconds left.
Becca?
Yeah.
Can you make sure that all the people who are speaking provide their full name for the record?
Yes, most have. There's a couple. I was going to say in the chat, if you've requested to speak, if you haven't already, let me know if you're a property owner or not within Wallingford. And then yes, if you can have your full name. I think we have most people's full names. But yeah, just verify.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Becca, I'd love to hear just when people speak, if they just tell us right off the bat if they're a property owner or not, would be great.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, first up on the list is Rhonda Bush. I will make a panelist.
Okay.
There we go.
I think you're muted, Rhonda. Oh.
Hi, Rhonda. There you go. Your speaker's still muted, but we see your face. There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. I strongly support the nomination before you and urge you to accept it and pass it to the keeper of the register. My name is Rhonda Clausen Bush, and I'm a property owner in the nomination area. I love my home, a craftsman bungalow built in 1921, and I cherish this neighborhood, this historic neighborhood. I grew up in this house where Wallingford was a working class neighborhood, attended school at Interlake, Hamilton, and Lincoln, all schools whose buildings or parts of buildings are now landmarks. Preservation consultant Mimi Sheridan noted that Wallingford had one of the largest and most comprehensive collections of early 20th century architecture left in Seattle. Wallingford is unique and is largely due to the sense of place defined by the historic buildings found here. I joined a community group that was developing a historical society with historians Paul Dorpat and Tom Veith. The plan was to hold educational activities to about the history and architecture of Wallingford to increase the civic pride. This grassroots group grew to become Historic Wallingford, whose mission is to foster an awareness of and appreciation for Wallingford's historic architecture. This is done in many ways that you can review on our website, historicwallingford.org. This group has become a part of the fabric of the community. And although there were several—
I think you muted yourself, Rhonda.
Okay. There are several landmark public buildings in Wallingford, like the Good Shepherd Center and the Wallingford Center. There were no preservation designations centered on the hundreds of 100 and 120-year-old historic residents. With this in mind, we consulted with several preservation professionals, and it was suggested that we pursue the National Register Historic District. We hired consultants, Northwest Vernacular, to lead the Wallingford Historic District feasibility study, and data from that led to this nomination. So let me express my immense gratitude to Northwest Vernacular, and with nearly 3 years of research and data gathered with more than 2,000 volunteer hours donated, this nomination is being prepared to the standards and requirements set by the National Service for National Register Historic District. We greatly appreciate those who volunteered their time and their dedication to this community that they cherish. And we thank the financial supporters, we thank our donors for culture and Tableau software. So thank you to the designation will offer a tool to promote and celebrate this special community and to raise the profile of the historic architecture found in Wallingford. Let me finally clearly state that Historic Wallingford is not advocating for any zoning change. As a small volunteer organizations, we have and will continue to diligently offer resources and educational activities to promote the value of the historic resources found here and to advocate for the community.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Next, we have Kelly Refer, who I will make a panelist. And then after Kelly, we have Thomas Berg.
Okay, Kelly.
Hello, my name is Kelly Reefer, and I am a property owner in Wallingford, and I strongly object to this proposal. There are many things that are very special and unique about Wallingford. I'm a big fan of Meridian Park and Good Shepherd Center and strongly encourage those to be maintained as historic districts. But this is too large a swath of land in a growing and changing city to make a historic district. There are also many houses like mine, a building that was built in 2019, that are not historic at all. There's a wide variety of townhomes and other buildings that do not fit the designation of being historic. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that Wallingford is a community that has great access to transit despite not having the historic streetcar anymore. We have light rail and the 44, one of the best east-west bus routes, and we need to be a neighborhood that allows us to be welcoming and accessible for growing families and to support infill development so that we can actually be more climate resilient as a neighborhood. We need to be building community and supporting each other. And also there are some beautiful historic homes, and maybe we just keep those 13 homes that were, unique architectural homes. Maybe they're the only ones that get a designation, but too wide a swath of land is really going to limit our ability to grow and change and be a climate resilient neighborhood. It's also important to really focus on the affordability of families right now. These houses may have started out affordable, but they are no longer affordable for the majority of people. Houses are going for about $1 million in this proposed historic district, even if they are in terrible condition, like some of the houses near me. I think it's really important. Oh, would you like to know? I'm a property owner on 4th Avenue Northeast. So, that is a really great spot where there's actually a diverse amount of houses. We have townhomes, we have apartment buildings, we have dadus, we have folks who are renting in these homes, and renters really deserve a voice in this conversation. And I think it's really problematic that we're only prioritizing property owners, especially in a neighborhood that is so expensive and exclusionary. Please do not support this and think about the opportunities and the things that we're cutting off by making Wallingford a historic district. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly.
All right, next is Thomas.
While Thomas is queuing up there, I forgot to let you know that all the letters that came in have actually been posted on our website. Certainly the council and the public is willing to read those, able to read those comments, both pro and con on the district. And I just reposted them this morning at 8:30. So all the ones that I have, at least from 8:30 this morning, are up.
Thank you,
Thomas.
Michael.
Yes, absolutely. Thomas, go for it.
Hey, everyone. My name is Thomas Berg. I'm a relatively new homeowner in the proposed historic Wallingford district. I live with my wife and our goofy little 9-month-old at the corner of 49th Street and Burke Avenue North. So I'm here today because I care about this community deeply, and I care about what the world is going to look like for the next generation. So quick note at the top, I recognize the official commenting rules are set by federal guidelines which preclude residents who are renters from making their voices heard at the same level as mine, but that doesn't mean it's right. I mean, restricting voices to only property owners was indeed this country's policy for most of its existence, but I think we can all agree this policy was neither right nor just. The community belongs to everyone, not just those of us who have their name on the title. But getting back to the point, we all know how crazy housing prices are in the Seattle area today, right? And the problem is especially acute in North Seattle. So after more than a decade of renting, my wife and I were incredibly fortunate to have been able to buy a house in Wallingford in 2021. But the only reason we were able to afford this house is because for years we were what's known as a DINK household. That's dual income, no kids household with 2 generous incomes from tech companies. And I believe granting the proposed historic designation will effectively cement this as a permanent requirement for buying property in Wallingford. So the proposed historic district is expansive. The initial scope is affecting roughly 500 single family homes and all within a historically redlined area. It's not a great thing that we want to preserve, right? I would understand a more narrowly tailored historic designation of a single strip or maybe a set of landmarks, like those fish hatcheries that we discussed earlier. They sound exactly like the types of places that a historic designation is designed to protect, but this is different. The current proposal reads as a thinly veiled attempt to cement the status quo of single family houses in Wallingford. It weaponizes the historic designation process, which is a common tactic used nationwide by single family homeowners who oppose upzoning. It espouses to protect existing homeowners like me, but never clearly states what we're being protected from. Regardless, if we pause for a second to think about groups of citizens in Seattle who truly need protection today, would single-family homeowners in Wallingford really make that list? A historic designation creates significant roadblocks to building anything new, preventing additional housing types like duplexes, row houses, and modest townhomes from being added to our community perpetuates the unaffordability of housing. In closing, I don't want my son to grow up in a neighborhood where only tech families can afford to live. Communities are built on the vibrancy brought by diversity, and putting up additional barriers to building affordable housing prevents many families from being able to buy a place of their own in Wallingford. Voting for this proposed historic district is directly at odds with the values of diversity and equity, and those are values that I hope all of us here share. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
So Thomas, I just want to say quickly, I understand your frustration with the National Register rules at the Park Service. I would encourage you to write to the National Park Service and give your perspective on the rules. We have no control on whether the Park Service is willing to change the regulations. Although, as I said earlier, believe me, we tried, but you are all in positions of power, not over the federal government, Haley. If I was, we'd all have healthcare free. But
thank you. I will do that.
But
I understand
will encourage
the predicament we're in.
people. You have control of the energy process, not when it's federal. So I would really encourage anybody who's frustrated with the way that owners and renters are treated, the way that the owner objections go, to write your comments to the National Park Service, because you can reject this. That's different. I would encourage you to do that, because we are pushing the National Register the National Park Service, hard on re-looking at their criteria, integrity, a lot of things. And I think it's important for the public to also note to the National Park Service their concerns. So I would love to say I had control over the federal government, maybe not, but I don't. So I would write to the National Park Service with your viewpoint, and I would encourage anyone else with concerns to write to the Park Service with their viewpoint. And thank you, Thomas.
All right, thank you, Allison. Becca, do we have others?
Yes, I'm going to make Tom Fugaloro a panelist. And then after him, we have Brian Krishner.
Okay. Hi, Tom.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, we can.
I am Tom Pucaloro. I am a co-owner of a house at 4542 4th Avenue Northeast within the historic district proposal. And I just want to say, first of all, that I very much support the letter that you've probably seen many times for Wallingford for All, and all of their reasoning for why we should. I really encourage you all to reject this proposal. I want to say that I read the materials supporting this proposal, and I actually really enjoyed reading the historical narrative section in there, and I really enjoyed all the maps. I love this neighborhood, that's why I live here, and I do think it's special. But there's nothing, even after reading all of that, there's nothing notably historic about this neighborhood that is not historic for the 5 blocks south of 45th or the 5 blocks north of 50th, or, you could drop that, that shape of this district anywhere in the city at random, and you could come up with a perfectly fine reason why it should be historically designated. So I don't understand. I think that historic designation should mean something. And if this area is historic, then everything is historic, and therefore it doesn't mean anything anymore. And I think this board probably understands that this designation should mean something. I really like that narrative in the maps, and I hope that they package it into a little book and sell it in nearby stores. I'd buy a copy just because I like history. But I don't think that it justifies this designation. I also want to show you out the window this house behind me, which we've been watching get renovated. Now, before it was renovated, it was a group house. The basement flooded constantly, it's full of mold, full of lead paint and asbestos and everything, but it was very cheap. And when it got sold and the renters got kicked out of there, there was nowhere cheaper for people to go. And I know for a fact that some of the residents in that home are homeless now. Right beyond that house, right on the other side of that house, there are people living in bushes because that's the only place they can afford to live.
Tom, you have reached your 2 minutes.
Okay, so I just want to say that I think the 100-year-old wood in that house is not as important as the people in the neighborhood. And anything that would put up red tape to build more homes, I am very much against. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, I think we have Brian next.
My name is Brian Kirshner. I'm a homeowner on North 49th Street in the proposed historic district. A reporter asked me what I thought historic Wallingford intended with this designation. I replied, it doesn't matter, because when you hurt people, when you damage the fabric of a community, even the best intentions cannot change the harm. The Department of Architecture and Historic Preservation says a designation will increase home prices, exacerbating the pain of economic displacement and exclusion, intended or not. Proceeding with the process requiring home ownership to vote will set a terrible example of failing to be inclusive of our renting neighbors, intended or not. It is unfortunate the federal rules do not include what's needed to ensure care and respect for my neighbors and safeguard the character of my neighborhood. As stewards of historic preservation activities and programs, I hope you will choose a path forward that does better by both. What you do not feel you can mandate, you can request. What you do not feel has been settled today, you can delay this process for more opportunities to be inclusive and to address these issues. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, next up is Sarah. Is Sarah Martin still on? Can you raise your hand, Sarah Martin, if you're still on? I'm not seeing your name. Thank you. There you are. Oh, I see it. All righty. Promoting to a panelist.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, my name is Sarah Martin, and I have lived in and worked in Wallingford for the past 7.5 years, and I love Wallingford. I've been involved with historic preservation with Historic Wallingford since 2018, and I volunteer on the board of directors. I bring to my volunteer effort 20 years of professional experience in public history and historic preservation. And our organization, it's important to know, we began this effort with a feasibility study in 2019, and it was to determine if Wallingford had any potential historic districts. We didn't even know if it did or not. So we had a groundwell of enthusiastic support coming out of that feasibility study. And the pandemic then hit, and we had all sorts of challenges, as you can imagine. And then Historic Wallingford became the target of a pretty intensive disinformation campaign, and it continues to this day. Some of our volunteers have been turned away by the vitriol and are no longer comfortable participating in public. So I just want to make clear to the commission Historic Wallingford's intentions and goals with this application. We hope a National Register district will increase pride in the neighborhood. We hope it elevates the stories of those who shaped its history. We hope it raises the profile of Wallingford's older residences and the neighborhood design features. And we encourage, and we hope it encourages conservation, maintenance, and adaptive reuse of older buildings. And most importantly, I want to convey to the commission that we hope you see through this deceptive disinformation campaign, and we hope that you fairly consider the application on its merits and on the criteria that are outlined in the application. We thank Northwest Vernacular for all their work, and we thank Michael Hauser for your expertise in this process. And we're grateful to the commission today for your time, for your attention, and for your thoughtful consideration of our application. I urge you to support this application to the National Register. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, next we have Tom Beef, and then following will be Katie Pratt.
Okay, Tom.
Here's coming.
Hey, Tom, are you there? I think he's having technical troubles.
Really quickly, while you're waiting for Tom, there was a question about Seattle single-family zoning. My understanding is Seattle does no longer have single-family zoning anywhere. It is now, and Doug, you can jump in if you want on help. My understanding it's residential zoning now, and residential zoning allows for duplexes, triplexes, corner stores, auxiliary dwelling units, and it's all across Seattle.
Correct, and accessory dwelling units, detached accessory dwelling units are also allowed. And one would hope that everyone would support affordable housing within any of these neighborhoods.
Somebody said not correct, but I believe that there is no, my understanding is that single family zoning was changed to residential zoning.
Okay, looks like we're still having problems with Tom.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There you go, Tom.
Okay,
Yes.
So I have a camera. I don't know why it's not active, but I'll just go ahead.
No worries.
I should say, first of all, I'm not at this time a resident or a property owner in Wallingford, though I was. I did live in that neighborhood for 22 years. First as a renter and then as a homeowner. The home I owned was sold and taken down by a developer who built 2 units on my 3,200 square foot property, both of which cost more than my property did. So I'm not sure replacing old buildings with new ones is necessarily going to reduce the cost. But that's just an aside. I just wanted to talk about why I'm here. I'm a trustee with the Historic Wallingford. I joined that organization because of my background in architecture. I'm also an author. Well, unfortunately, you can't see the book, Shape Seattle Architecture, a historical guide to the architects. I'm a member of the editorial board and a writer contributor to that. And I also I did a historic survey of the neighborhood in 2005, and I wrote a history called A Preliminary Sketch of Wallingford's History. And I've been involved in neighborhood planning in Wallingford. I was a member of the citywide Neighborhood Planning Advisory Committee and a member of the City of Seattle Landmarks Preservation Board for 8 years. I support nomination, obviously. I think it clearly meets at least 2 and possibly 4, all 4 of the criteria.
Tom, you have about 30 seconds left.
Okay, and the nomination, all the buildings in the nomination meet the age requirement, and most have fairly high integrity. And if they, in cases where they've been remodeled, they generally been remodeled in a way that would be acceptable under the guidelines of the National Park Service. So I think it's kind of a fairly clear case that the district proposal beats all the requirements and all the criteria. And I think it will support our goal of accentuating the history of the neighborhood and making that history available to people who are living here.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Becca, was there someone else?
Yes, so next we have Katie Pratt, and then Patrick Long will be next.
Hello again. I'm Katie Pratt with Northwest Vernacular. We prepared the National Register nomination on behalf of Historic Wallingford. And as Rhonda said, this was the result of countless hours of volunteer effort. We in fact trained neighbors to go out and do the survey work and do the field research. So this was very much a neighborhood effort. And then Spencer and I then packaged the nomination. And then Michael Hauser obviously spent so much time reviewing it on his end as well. We thought this was great in that we utilized that multiple property document about residential suburbs and focusing on the streetcar lines when we, through our research, uncovered how critical the streetcars were in the development of the neighborhood. You know, advertisements for new plats talked about how close it was to the U district, how you could easily get on the streetcar to get about. We can always talk about the architecture of the neighborhood, but we have lots of maps and things within the nomination that really talk about the demographics of the neighborhood. We do talk about redlining and the impacts that has had on the neighborhood, and also just really tracking the renter to ownership history throughout, and all of that is contained in the nomination. And we wanted to include all that to tell a fuller story about the neighborhood. So we thank you for the opportunity to talk about this really great neighborhood, and we appreciate your review and your service. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Becca, do we have others?
Yes, Patrick is jumping on.
I'm sorry, who?
Patrick Long.
Okay.
And then after Patrick, we'll have Mike Ruby.
Becca, could you let us know if they're property owners or not property owners, and unless they announce it themselves?
Yeah.
We just need to know for the record.
Absolutely. At this point, I don't have anybody on the list that is a property owner. I believe we've gotten to all of them, unless it wasn't stated in the chat. And then, yeah, hopefully they'll let us know when I get through to them on the list.
Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not a resident of the district. I live 2 blocks south of the district. And I would just like to say that again, or just repeat that the intention of the Historic Wallingford is not to limit development. And I'm on the board of the directors. I was involved in the beginning when we actually did the first feasibility study to, survey the neighborhood. And I'll point out that Seattle zoning has already been changed in certain areas of the city to be higher than the residential zoning that Allison mentioned. My particular house, again, is in an upzoned section beyond the residential zoning, and you can put 6 units on a residential lot. And in fact, there are 2 buildings that just went up on those spaces. One, I am not opposed to that. I think we do need affordable housing. The city has created a system that does not encourage that. All these new units are selling for $1 million as well. So, and the district, doesn't affect that at all. And we are trying to
30 seconds left, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's basically it. I mean, obviously, I strongly support the district, and I think the historical research that I was involved in as a volunteer only made that clearer in terms of the history of the neighborhood and the growth of Seattle. And I do think we need to focus on the history, which I think we've done, a good job of. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, next we have Mike.
Actually, I apologize. I had missed Adam Prairie had mentioned he wanted to talk. He is a property owner. So
okay,
I will have him, and then we will have Mike next. He's coming on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Go right ahead, Adam.
My name is Adam Prairie, and I'm a homeowner on 4th Avenue in Wallingford. I've lived in this neighborhood for over 10 years, and I love it here. Over that time, I've seen many folks pushed out of this neighborhood because of rapidly increasing housing costs. And I see this effort as only contributing to that problem. So therefore, I'm strongly opposed to this potential historic designation. Preserving specific buildings makes sense to me, but designating an entire neighborhood as such without clear reasons to do so will only serve to create even more economic pressure in this already very tight housing market in our neighborhood. Anything that would potentially exacerbate the enormous inequities that already exist in our neighborhood should be avoided. And I strongly believe that this historic designation will do so, and specifically in the realm of increasing housing costs and increasing property values for people who are already doing all right. So please do not give approval to this historic designation. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay. Thank you, Adam.
All right. I'll have Mike, and then actually I have Ryan, who has been able to stay on, and we'll have him next. So Mike, panelist. All right, he's coming on.
Good morning. I'm
Mike.
I'm a property owner in the Wallingford neighborhood, but not in the proposed historic district. I realize that your task today is to determine if the submitted application has demonstrated that the proposed district meets criteria A and criteria C of the National Register guidelines. I believe it does, and I urge you to approve the application. But today I'd like to provide you with some context of the effort that resulted in submitting this application. My interest in historic architecture in Wallingford began in 2010. I was conducting Wallingford walks around our neighborhood during the summer months. We toured all sorts of things: gardens, public art, parks. I approached Al Elliott, the retired head of Historic Seattle, about leading a tour of the neighborhood, pointing out the interesting houses and explaining their architecture. That proved to be one of our most popular walks, so we repeated it in subsequent years with larger and larger participation each year. I learned to be very appreciative of the diversity of architectural forms and some of the features that differentiated one style from another. A few years later, when several of us decided to work together To promote preserving the historic character of these houses, we organized talks and weekend workshops on the architecture of Wallingford houses and what was important about it. Here are posters for 2 of the day-long workshops we held. The workshops featured architects and contractors who were experienced with how you remodel and expand while honoring the original design. It was our intent and hope that by getting this information out to the neighborhood, we would see more careful effort to retain the character of houses that make Wallingford such a pleasant place to wander. And in fact, recently we have seen just exactly that much more frequently. It is our
30
intent
seconds.
that designation of the district will further alert our neighbors to what a valuable treasure they have in their hands and will galvanize them to preserve it and keep it and care for it. Again, I urge you to approve this application.
Alrighty, next we have Ryan DiRamo. He is a property owner.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. My name's Ryan, and I'm a property owner of a historic craftsman bungalow outside the Wallingford boundary, and I oppose this designation. These homes are not unique to Wallingford or Seattle or the state of Washington. While the honorary district is just that, honorary, the designation has been used to establish local designations which stop development in upzones for a city that desperately needs them. This sets a bad precedent before Seattle completes its comprehensive plan update, a process currently underway. As someone who owns a similar home that's seeking designation today, I wanted to share that I would oppose a similar designation in my neighborhood and for my home as well. This designation ignores too many voices that are in Wallingford but do not own, voices who live in a condominium but do not get equal one-to-one voting privileges, and voices who have been pushed outside of this neighborhood due to rising home values and rent because the neighborhood has not been able to add homes where we desperately need them. Please pause this designation and reconsider the designation as a whole. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next we
Thank
have
you, Ryan.
Vanessa. Next we have Vanessa, and then after Vanessa will be Haley. And I believe now I have gotten all of the property owners. So again, if I missed you, please let me know in the chat or raise your hand.
But I want to clarify, Ryan, you said you're a property owner, but are you a property owner inside the district boundaries of Wallingford? We need to know.
I'm a property owner outside the boundary of Wallingford's designated district.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, Vanessa.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. So my name is Vanessa Chin. I am not a resident of Wallingford, but I'm honored to be speaking to you as a historic Wallingford board member. I began volunteering on this district effort in 2020 while studying historic preservation at the University of Washington. As a student, I jumped at this great opportunity to get some real life hands-on experience with a grassroots neighborhood organization. On my first time out surveying the nominated district area, it became apparent that Wallingford has unique qualities that sets it apart from other Seattle neighborhoods. With its abundance of intact early mid-20th century homes on narrow residential lots and clustering of older apartment buildings, this area of Wallingford maintains its distinct suburban feel and still demonstrates its initial development as a working class neighborhood along streetcar lines. However, this nomination is about much more than Wallingford's house styles. It's also about the generations of Wallingfordians who walk these streets and shape this neighborhood. Wallingford residents of the early 1900s were mostly immigrants from Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, Italy, and even some from China and Syria. With its small, cheap lots, Wallingford developed as an affordable neighborhood for working and middle-class residents. Small-time builders and developers that lived in Wallingford, like Judd Yoho, built out the neighborhood 1, 2, and 3 houses at a time. A National Register Historic District designation would raise the profile of Wallingford's residences, increase pride in the neighborhood, illuminate the stories of those who shaped its history, raise awareness of the importance of building and neighborhood design features, and contribute to the maintenance of historic places. I enthusiastically support this nomination and believe that the district is eligible under criteria A and C for its local significance as an intact early residential suburb of Seattle. I please ask that you vote to forward this nomination to the keeper of the National Register. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next is Haley Karcher, and then we have David Alvarez.
Hi, my name is Haley Karcher. I'm a resident of Seattle and I'm a property owner, but not within the historic district. I have a master's in history of education with a specialization in school desegregation in Seattle. Currently working on my doctorate at the College of Education at the University of Washington, studying the effects of gentrification on schools. The number one issue making racially equitable enrollment in schools in Seattle difficult is exclusionary zoning. So that's the single family zoning that we're talking about here. That's exactly what this historic district would make permanent. I would like to add that the confusion over the zoning impacts that were not included at all in the original proposal, nor has been clarified by the council or any of the people that have supported the plan, is extremely problematic and is grounds on its own for not supporting this proposal as it stands now. That should be outlined in the proposal. It doesn't seem logical or make sense if the goal of the proposal is to protect homes, that wouldn't also make development near impossible, right? The logic there doesn't make sense to me. We desperately need affordable multifamily housing in Seattle, exactly what this proposal is against. You can call it what you want, but continuing single family zoning is modern day redlining and version of restrictive covenants. This proposal continues an ugly history in Seattle of protecting land for wealthy people, mainly white. A lot of the proposals or the proponents of this have brought up that Wallingford used to be a middle-class neighborhood. That is not the case now. Those homes are selling for over $1 million. And it will continue if proposals like this are granted, and many other neighbors will learn that this is a process that they can also follow to protect their extremely expensive homes. I want to live in Seattle that is not just for the rich. So I strongly urge the council to reject this proposal, at least until it has a clear explanation of the zoning impacts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Haley.
All right, next is David Alvarez, and then we have Nasheen.
Hello, my name is David Alvarez. I live in Wallingford on 51st Street near Latona as a renter. I am asking you not to approve this application for historic designation at this time. Please pause this process until the Seattle Comprehensive Plan update, which is underway, is finished. We are in the midst of a historic housing crisis right now in the city. And this proposal is going to make things worse. And the comprehensive plan that Seattle is mentioning would let Wallingford know as a neighborhood what it can do, its fair share, to meet that housing crisis. And so I ask the people on this panel to do something radical, which is wait. Just take a second and breathe. And wait until this comprehensive plan is completed so that we can see what Wallingford can do moving forward. If we're prioritizing historic buildings over human suffering, what is history going to say about this neighborhood? What is it going to say about this city? What is it going to say about this society? It's as if people were dying of thirst and we're putting a fence around a body of water. It's not right. So let's please pause and wait until the comprehensive plan is completed so that we can see what Wallingford can do to meet this housing crisis. People are dying. Please do something radical and wait. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Becca, anyone else?
Yes, Nasheen is next, and then Katie L.
Okay, and Becca, can you share with us how many more folks are interested here? Because you initially said 14.
Yeah, we got a few more once the
What's a
the
few more?
nomination. We are up to, let's see, 1, 2. We have 5 left.
Okay. All right, I think we should close it here at the 5 and then move on from there. Okay, who's next?
Nasheen.
Okay.
My name
Sheen. I'm a homeowner in nearby Fremont. I spend a lot of time in Wallingford, and my children will be going to school in Wallingford as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am a volunteer with the all-volunteer group Wallingford for All, which has knocked on over 200 doors in the proposed historic district to do community education on this nomination. About half of the people we spoke to were not familiar with the nomination, and of those who were familiar, most were not aware that by not objecting, they would be considered as consenting. So we're a little bit concerned about whether the community has really been given a chance to weigh in here. I'm also encouraged by the discussion in earlier agenda items about social history, and as others have brought up, this period of time in Seattle was a period of redlining, racial covenants, and exclusionary zoning that allowed single-family neighborhoods like these to flourish and become unaffordable. So regardless of how we feel about the architecture, I'm wondering if this is a period of time and housing history that we want to honor. I believe there are ways of honoring the past that do not introduce potential roadblocks to change that is needed during a housing crisis, and that we really should be planning for the future rather than the past. And I encourage you to read the thoughtful letters submitted by Wallingford High School students on this issue, none of whom have asked for, are not asking for this historic district, and would really like us to listen to the youth on this. So I ask you to take into consideration the potential downstream impacts of this decision and vote against approving this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Katie. And Katie, can you let me know what your last name is? She's coming on right now.
Hi, my name is Katie Lind, and I'm a displaced resident and former renter in the Wallingford Historic District for over 10 years. I'm so encouraged by my neighbors speaking out against this designation. This is an emotional issue for me, no longer living in Wallingford, a neighborhood I called home for 10 years, so I appreciate the eloquence of these neighbors. I urge you to vote no on this designation. I have a master's degree in urban planning and studied historic preservation, and a concentration of craftsman homes does not a historic designation make. I question historic Wallingford's motivations in seeking this designation. You do not need a historic district to have pride in neighborhood or recognize the past. Plus, what are we recognizing? Single family zoning in a history with a housing shortage? And to set the record straight, again, historic Wallingford is not truly grassroots. It is well-funded, organized, with strong ties to the Wallingford Community Council, who held anti-holla rallies and a funeral for the death of neighborhood planning. Wallingford for All is truly grassroots and seeks to have an inclusive conversation about the future of the neighborhood, including housing and planning, that is not limited to the voices of homeowners who far too often have dominated the conversation. It is so disheartening to hear that property owners are the only ones who have a voice in this designation. My partner and I lived in Wallingford for 10 years as renters, and he owns a business in the area. And when we tried to buy in Wallingford, we were priced out time and time again on old homes that needed too much work and went for 40% over asking. I urge you to step back and conduct a voluntary, inclusive process that gives renters an equal voice to homeowners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And please don't look narrowly and bureaucratically at the federal rules alone, but rather consider the impact of families like mine struggling with housing affordability and the bad example that this sets by treating renters as second-class citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
All right, next we have Charlie, and then we have Keenan and and then that is the last of the speakers.
Okay. Charlie? I think you're on mute, Charlie, or can't hear you. Yeah, we still can't hear you.
Charlie, you're not showing muted as on our end, so it's got to be something going on with your end.
If you go down to the bottom of your screen where the mic is, there's like a little up button, and sometimes you just have to change where the audio is coming from. No.
Becca, he's asking to call back in. Can you go to the next one and then have him move down the list?
We can do that.
Yeah. Okay. So
Charlie,
we'll
you want to
have,
try getting back in? And we'll go to the next and we'll certainly make sure we catch you back. So go ahead.
all right. So next is Keenan, promoting to a panelist. Oh,
Can you hear me? Sorry.
yes, we can hear you, Keenan.
Hi, I'm not a property owner in the proposed district, though I am a Seattle resident. I'm opposing this proposal due to its scope and concerns with its lack of architectural significance. A large number of these homes are prefabricated and Sears catalog homes that were sold nationally. The craftsman is fairly indistinct in America for that very reason, that was sold in almost every neighborhood in the country. These homes exist across the Pacific Northwest and the United States. We didn't document these generic homes because they were so prevalent. And again, this proposal for the historic district, the homes inside of it are indistinct from those just mere blocks away. I don't understand why they are not included, or it's not just scaled back to include the most significant buildings. Additionally, I just want to add that we've had some very good discussions about cultural significance in both the salmon hatchery and the apple proposals. I thought those were really insightful. And I'm concerned with this application specifically because it touts its collection to preserve buildings, but there are members behind the proposal that publicly acknowledge their efforts in exclusionary zoning as far back as the 70s and creating a roadmap to ban UW duplexes in this neighborhood.
30 seconds, Keenan.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up there. I just think that's a part that's really missing in this proposal, and I'd like to get more clarity on why this collection that's been created due to exclusionary zoning is significant. Thanks.
Thank you, Keenan. Okay, you want to go back to Charlie? Try that again, or?
Let's try Charlie again. All right, promoting to a panelist. I'm not seeing Charlie pop up. Let me make sure I actually clicked it. Sorry.
Was there someone else?
I called in as a. I think he called in on a separate number. So let me see if I can find that. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Charlie, you're muted.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Awesome. Thank you for your patience. And yeah, thank you for working with me there. Just wanted to say my name's Charlie Uman. I'm a current renter in Wallingford, not in the historic district, but just had some thoughts about the designation of the historic district. The sprawling residential development in most of Seattle is reflective of a time where Seattle was flush with space and a much lower population. It was the best possible development for those buildings at the time, or those building homes at the time. But as we discussed here, that was very long ago. Tom Facolaro made a great point about how non-noteworthy these places are. Historic Wallingford claims that this neighborhood is historic, but the definition of historic is to describe something as famous or important in history. Old does not automatically make something famous or important. Wallingford's homes are not reasonably distinct from Maple Leaf or Ravenna, both places that I've lived, as well as Queen Anne, Crown Hill, Madrona, Magnolia, West Seattle, Seward Park, or any other historically single-family zoned area in Seattle. Wallingford is fantastically accessible location-wise, but otherwise nondescript in the wealth of Seattle neighborhoods. This attempt to declare an otherwise nondescript Seattle neighborhood as historic will do nothing but add another barrier to increasing density in this area. And as Mr. Hauser pointed out in his presentation before the testimonies, increasing density in the neighborhood is a part of Wallingford's history. And so this historic designation would actually run against the grain of the history of this neighborhood. What was the best possible development for those building homes a century ago is now outdated for those in the present and those future generations that are hoping to find places to live in Seattle.
30 seconds, Charlie. Oh.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Sorry, I think I spoke over him when he letting him know he had 30 seconds left, and he was saying thank you.
Oh, okay.
So our last speaker is Sam.
Okay. I think you're muted if you're.
Hi, yes, thank you. This is Hui Pham again with the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, the nonprofit organization dedicated to saving places that matter in Washington state and to promoting sustainable and economically viable communities through a historic preservation ethic. In reviewing the proposal, we support the nomination to the National Register of Historic Places for the Wallingford Meridian Streetcar neighborhood, as we feel that it meets and features the earliest 20th century architectural styles, craftsman bungalows, and transit development patterns as it relates to the neighborhood. We also acknowledge that the National Register nomination does not affect zoning and density or should not assess property values either. Furthermore, when historic preservation ethic does have power, it can be used as a change management system against unfettered market rate pressures of those condos and those single family replacements or developments. And we acknowledge that Seattle and our state is in need of housing and density, but through historic preservation, it can be used as a tool for applying equity and cultural preservation when a developer wants to come in and replace it all with equally unaffordable housing. And we acknowledge that those are two separate issues which can have implications within each other, but specifically to the National Register nomination, it meets the criterion and should be forwarded to the National Register. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I think that closes the public hearing at this point. And now turn it over to the board for comment and or discussion. Who would like to go first? If not, I'll turn it over to Doug. Okay, Doug.
First off, we've heard everyone's voice, and everybody has been allowed to speak. Upon reviewing the document, I'd like to commend the preparers for the amount of documentation that was put in place. There was a lot about redlining, there was a lot about maps, there was a lot of information there, a huge amount of information, and a lot of documentary evidence. The one question I had in reviewing it, however, was if the thesis in the title is a streetcar neighborhood, there's a lot of documentation, but there's not a lot of ways that that information tells me how that influenced the neighborhood and how it became a streetcar neighborhood because of that. Say, you know, here was a stop of the streetcar and density from apartments was developed at that point because of the proximity, and then further out was single family zoning and some other things around that. And so that's a question that I have that I'd like the board to discuss and comment on.
Okay. Michael, do you have any thoughts on information related to Doug's concern or item that he's raised?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I'll let Michael Sullivan chime in a minute, but just from my perspective, Keep in mind that the nomination is playing off of the multiple property document, and that's one of the resource types in the document. And clearly in the document itself, the streetcar did actually go right through the neighborhood and right on the edge of it. So that's where the name comes up. We can certainly just pull streetcar from the name of the nomination. That's easy enough to do if that's makes people feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
Well, let me, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, please, Michael, go ahead.
Well, I've been reading through all the letters and of course, listening attentively to all the comments. And, you know, I've worked around the National Historic Preservation Act and the package of environmental protection laws that the federal government passed in the 1970s, the Wilderness Act, Historic Preservation Act, you know, NEPA, our environmental protection laws, all came in the 1970s. And the effort there was to try to recognize what do we have that is at risk of being lost, and how do we, you know, what action can we take? Our historic preservation laws are somewhat different from our other environmental protection laws in that the Supreme Court has upheld that the responsibility for passing laws about blocking demolition and getting into areas of property rights, even zoning and laws, are all deferred to the local government. And it's really up to local landmark commissions and local government, municipalities, to identify what are the buildings that we want to actually assert legal protection over. And the National Register is meant to just put into at a national level a recognition that these are properties that are important at a national level, and the actual teeth is left up to local government. So I understand when local conditions get to a point where real estate markets and other demands begin to, you know, want to displace or replace resources, that in the end, that's where the decision's going to be made. I know with the College Park nomination we did just in the last few years, a few other residential historic districts very recently, that Wallingford certainly matches up and is equal to those. And so I want to be consistent in the way we look at resources. These buildings are built out of the wood from ancient forests, and they aren't going to be built again. You know, there is room on these properties for additional ADUs, DDUs. I mean, all the local stuff can be handled with local commissions, local design review, and local demolition and local protections. So I, for one, in this, at the national level of significance, am confident, at least I feel, that the resources within this district meet the criteria that were given to apply to these buildings and the setting around them. So my feeling is that the district does meet the criteria for National Register at the local level, and consistent with the other districts in our region, in our state that we've approved, I would be in favor of the nomination.
Thank you, Michael. Other comments from other board members? Okay, hearing none, then we'll move to the nomination itself. And Doug, would you?
Or Stephanie.
Or Stephanie? Or
Are you asking for a motion or more discussion?
I think discussion, I asked for discussion. I've not heard any more. So having said that, we'll move to a motion.
Oh, okay. Well, I will add a bit of discussion in that I read the nomination and I too think that the neighborhood does meet the criteria. Clearly it was a ton of work by many people to put this together, and other folks have mentioned really great maps that were included in all the demographic data and all the data that's included in the maps. And I enjoyed looking at those. It would be nice if the streetcars were on more of the maps, just to integrate that into the work. There's a few pagination issues in the document that are easily corrected, of course. And some of the colors on the maps are hard to distinguish from each other. That said, if discussion is done, I can make a motion.
Yes, go right ahead.
Right. I would like to recommend that the Wallingford Meridian Streetcar Historic District in Seattle be forwarded to the keeper of the National Register of Historic Places for listing on the National Register under criteria A and C at the local level of significance.
Is there a second?
Is this available for the Washington Register?
No.
Okay.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay. The motion has been moved and seconded. And I'll call, Michael has seconded, and I'll call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much for your comments today. It's really been a very eventful day, obviously, for everyone. But I do think it's important that we hear, always hear the comments from the community, that we always try to understand as much as we can before decisions are made. And sometimes they're not easy, but it is important that we do listen. So thank you very much, everyone who's commented today. It's very important that you do. And I think also Allison's comments with respect to making sure that you notify both at the national level as well as your local representatives in congressional districts, to notify them as well as how you feel about this particular process and the changes that need to be made at the national level as well. So thank you very much, everyone. I think having any other items, Michael, then I think we're adjourned.
I don't have any additional items except to let you know that from our last review meeting, all those nominations have been listed, including the Coast Guard cutter, the patrol vessel at the national level of significance, which is exciting for us to have that. Also listed is the MPD for the Black American Experience in Pasco. The church was listed on the register. No problems, no issues. The park is still pending their review. So we should hear back about that any day now.
Good. Good information. Thank you for that update. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And we'll be seeing you very shortly again at our next meeting. Thank you again, Allison and Michael and Becca for working all the technology here for us today.
Good job, Becca. It was her first time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good work, everyone.
Michael, do you have a proposed time for the next meeting?
Well, our rough dates for the next meeting is, let me look here. It was
I
March.
think we're trying for January or February in Olympia.
Actually, we moved it back a long time ago, basically based on the idea that the weather was always bad in January, unless we want to do a Zoom. So we're out to March is kind of the timeframes that we're working with. And the rough date that I had set up is, hang on a second.
17th.
17th. Thank you, Jackie. Yes, I see that. The 17th of March.
Okay.
So we'll have to decide whether we want to do it in person or a Zoom. It sounds like this hybrid scenario is going to be very tough with the technology that is available to us. We got kind of lucky in Pasco, but had a hard time pulling that together.
Nick and I will be in Washington, DC on March 17th.
All right, well, we'll look at our calendars, and Michael, you can set something up to see what kind of time
Yeah.
convenience we might find. Lynn, you had a question or?
Yeah, I had a comment. I just wonder, we deferred 3 items, and is it fair, since this is October, to wait until March to hear those items?
Well, that's a good point.
And I was wondering if there is any way that we can do, like, hate to say it, but December or January, so that we can hear just those that we have deferred and pass, so that we can pass them along and not make those people wait.
I would say, Lynn, if they're ready and Michael finds the additional information is ready, I don't see why not. We could just have a quick special meeting just for those. Is that okay,
Right.
Aces?
I'm perfectly fine with that. Absolutely. Thank you, Lynn. It's a very good idea.
Yeah.
Yep. Good. Thank you for that.
That sounds fine to me as well.
Okay. So if Michael, you can let us know when things are ready to go for review, then we can then certainly come up with a time convenient for everybody.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thanks, Susan.
everyone.
All right.
See you sometime.
Happy holidays.
Yeah. What's they're coming up?
They are.
Yeah.
Becca, you want to stop the recording?